my guest is Norm Finkelstein. And I'm very excited to have him here today. Hello. What an honor. All right. Let's get you over there. Norm Finkelstein is in the building, ladies and gentlemen. You're rocking the Yeezys. Wow, that's cool.
They're not Yeezys.
Okay.
They're fake. They're $20.
All right. Hold on. And we're going to be talking about your book, Gaza's Gravediggers, an inquiry into corruption in high places. This is the maiden interview for your book, right? That's what you said. Also, you got to come closer to the microphone and speak really directly into it. Unfortunately, these microphones have very they're very sensitive. They have a high noise gate, so you got to get really up close and personal with it, if you don't mind. Norman Finkelstein's in the building. Gaza's Gravediggers is the book, and I am really excited. I'll be frank and upfront and honest with you. I have been very nervous about this interview. I have been a huge fan of your work for many, many years. I really appreciate your resilience and your steadfast nature throughout all of the attacks that you've received throughout your career. You are someone who's very stubborn, and I see that same energy in myself as well. I try to be like that as well. And I think that's what's necessary to be able to breach this very sophisticated network of propaganda that has, for many, many decades, I think, deluded many Americans, many people in the Western world into believing that Israel is the most moral nation on earth. Israel is our most important ally, the only democracy in the Middle East. And I think, and I read your book, and I saw a sense of nihilism in there as well, given the horrifying nature of the circumstances with Israel's genocide on Gaza. But I really appreciate that you have continuously pushed to uncover the truth. You are, of course, one of the most important chroniclers of the Israeli apartheid, centering the victims, and also talking about the sophisticated propaganda network. I am going to pull my questions really quickly, but I just wanted to give you that introduction first and foremost, and explain to you that I will be a little bit nervous, so I apologize.
Well, there's no grounds to be nervous. We're discussing the facts, and we just should be sober. But I don't see any rational grounds for nervousness. I think one of the peculiarities of the Israel-Palestine conflict, as compared to, say, South Africa, is South Africa never tried to make an, so to speak, intellectual case in defense of its system. The obvious reason that once the South African struggle, say, became a center of attention in the United States, it was impossible to defend it. We had just passed through the civil rights movement, the civil rights era, and there was no rational defense for the system of apartheid in South Africa. So apart from what you might call various organizations, in general, you didn't have to make a case. Whereas in the case of Israel, they had mobilized very sophisticated, abundant resources, but also sophisticated voices. And they made an intellectual case. So long as they made it, it was compelling, it was convincing, because there really wasn't. Now remember, I'm an old timer, so I'm talking about the 1970s, 1980s. There wasn't much of an organized intellectual resistance. What happened was I wrote a book, I believe it was 2012. It was called Knowing Too Much, Why the American Jewish Romance with Israel is Coming to an End. And the thesis of the book was more and more information was coming out about the nature of Israel and the Israel-Palestine conflict. And the information that was coming out primarily from human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, the Israeli Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories. They were all liberal sources. It's not like you could dismiss Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International. You couldn't credibly dismiss them as anti-Semitic. You couldn't credibly dismiss them as right-wing. You couldn't credibly dismiss them as trucking in invidious Jewish stereotypes. In fact, a large portion of their staff were Jewish, including the executive director, say in the case of Human Rights Watch, it was Kenneth Roth. So, and American Jews are overwhelmingly moderate to liberal in their political sensibilities. So there came a point of what you might call critical mass. You couldn't reconcile your political, ideological convictions with the facts that were coming out. And I predicted roughly around 2017, 2012 or 2017, I can't remember now. No, it's 2017. No, it was 2012. I predicted that this American Jewish support for Israel was going to begin to go on the wane. And then came Gaza, and Gaza was kind of overload. You couldn't any longer, strive as you may, you couldn't any longer. And so American Jews faced a crisis. And what I imagined would happen now, had reached critical mass with Gaza, and everything fell apart, aside from the handful of fanatics and crazies. It was indefensible. I think now, you can never say these things with certainty because the news cycle passes. Maybe it could return to what it was before. The fancy word is the status quo ante. But I don't think so. I think it's pretty much over, the romance between American Jews and Israel, because it's untenable. Jews are not right-wing by nature.
Yeah.
And they could not tolerate, they couldn't absorb or reconcile what was happening.
So we're gonna get into the book quickly, because I feel like there are a lot of historical analogs you utilize when comparing. You start off with October 7, and you immediately in the beginning of the book, you not only document the ways in which the Israeli government engaged in atrocity, but you actually hyper focus instead on the Western media, the Western officials, the international institutions, and how they failed. You wrote the Gaza's Grave Diggers with the explicit purpose of documenting the institutional corruption that supported the genocide of Palestinians rather than Israel's actions themselves, though. That was a deliberate effort. You open the book referencing the fifth labor of Hercules, in which he's ordered to clean out the Augean stables filled with animal poop. This metaphor extends to the entirety of the book. Can you explain the reference to both myself and the viewers, and why do you believe it's necessary to focus the story on the institutions that insulated and supported Israel rather than Israel itself?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I did not attack Biden. I have some passing remarks about Mr. Blinken, nothing substantive. I certainly didn't focus much attention on Mr. Netanyahu, on his cohorts, because the simple reason is, when I wrote several books on Gaza, the record was not known. It was sort of hidden away, collecting dust in human rights reports. Even the human rights organizations, they do their research, but then there's supposed to be a second step. They're supposed to lobby on the basis of your research. The second step never came. The reports simply collected dust. And so I wanted to preserve the historical record. And the purpose was because nobody had done that kind of work. I could say a large chunk of my life now sits on my bookshelf at home, bookshelves at home, with just not thousands, but tens of thousands of pages printed out of human rights report. I wanted to document for history the record. That wasn't necessary with Gaza. Gaza now, everybody knows who wants to know. Everybody knows what's going on. And I felt to simply document the record again was a waste of time. The record is known, and also the perpetrators are known. It'll probably, in my generation, the slogan was, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? Referring to Lyndon Baines Johnson, the president during the war in Vietnam. I think Genocide Joe is going to go down also.
Yeah.
That will be remembered. So all of that seems superfluous to go through the record again. If I had great narrative powers, I would have done it. I don't know if you've read, and I don't know if even your viewers will know, it was a wonderful, wonderful book written on the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. It's long forgotten now, but between 15 and 20,000 Palestinian and Lebanese were killed, overwhelmingly civilian. It was, up until Gaza was by far the biggest bloodletting. And there was a British historian, a British journalist, Robert Fisk, and he wrote this book, Pity the Nation. It's really breathtaking. It's a breathtaking piece of narrative history. I don't have those narrative powers. I have good expository powers. I can sit down, analyze a document, and I can logically go through it, and I don't leave any wiggle room. You're cornered, you're trapped, it's case closed. So I didn't waste my time on the documenting the facts. What I did do was I wanted to look at agencies, institutions from which you expect better. The International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the UN Commissions of Inquiry, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and where you expect better, and to hold them accountable, not just the usual suspects, but also other people who, because of careerism, cupidity, cowardice, they sold their souls. Now, I want to be clear. The record was not terrible by the international institutions. It was not. We don't want a straw man. They were not. It was not terrible. The statements by the UN senior officials, like Philippe Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA, Gutierrez, a lot of it was quite good. And I acknowledge that. But there were other things that were terrible. Now, so far I've spoken in abstract.
We're gonna dial in on that for sure.
So let me just, since that's coming later.
Yeah.
Then, so that was my, so to speak, my modus operandi.
Yeah.
When I wrote Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom, nobody knew any of this. And it's a terrible story. I won't call it tragic, because the Greek term tragic means the fate was preordained. It was not preordained. This was systematic, methodical, and intentional.
Yeah.
But it's a horrible history, and I wrote to chronicle. This time, though, I wrote to indict, to hold these people accountable. And I still hope they will be held accountable.
Yeah.
There are certain officials who either should be censured or they should be ousted from office. And I named them very clearly.
Yeah. And we're going to get to that. But I do want to start with your prologue, because the book opens briefly with October 7, but it actually very quickly shifts into Nat Turner's 1831 slave revolt. And despite ordering his followers to kill all white people, he's now revered as an American freedom fighter, which you also talk about. You ask, before he stands condemned, mustn't it be asked, except to live and die in thraldom, what alternative did Nat Turner have? You also mentioned at the time, revered white abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison expressed horror over the events that took place, but blamed the white slave-owning population, saying, "We have warned our countrymen of the danger of persisting in their unrighteous conduct." I've also utilized the Nat Turner rebellion example when referencing October 7. You have as well. I've seen your interactions on Piers Morgan, which is, an interesting affair. We can talk about that later as well. But I wanted to hear, do you view yourself as a modern day equivalent of the white abolitionist after writing about the Zionist oppression of Palestine for over 4 decades now? And obviously, you're probably a little too humble to answer that in a similar manner. But what other warnings have been ignored that you've been ringing the alarm bells on?
First of all, one has to acknowledge one's precursors, and one has to acknowledge one's current collaborators. There have been many people. It's still a small number, but there's still a number. My precursors were people like Noam Chomsky, Israel Shahar from the country Israel, Edward Said. They came before me, and in many ways, I learned from them both their steadfastness and also their mental powers, their dedication, their conscientious. I would say now I've entered the age where they're gone. They're not on the scene anymore. And so the mantle has, so to speak, with the baton has been passed to me. I don't believe I had any great powers of prediction. A lot of my analysis since October 7th, I believe, has been borne out. But in general, those who predicted that if Israel continued with the occupation, there's going to be a dramatic deterioration in Israeli society. There was a fellow, I suspect you've never even heard of him, Yeshayahu Leibovich. And he was Israel's great philosopher. He had 4 PhDs, really smart guy. And he, along with a certain number of others, said as early as 1967, this occupation is going to be a complete disaster. That if you don't end it, Israel, he coined the phrase, by the way, Yeshayahu Leibovich, who was the most revered intellectual in Israel. He coined the phrase, Israel's turning into a country of Judeo-Nazis.
People will say that term actually originated from David Duke sometimes.
No.
What's
David Duke was not bright enough to originate it.
So what's interesting on that point that you just mentioned is one of the examples that I often use is the horror in reaction to the Deir Yassin massacre from the likes of Albert Einstein, who has gone back and forth and has a more complex, I think, experience with Zionism and what it turned into. But his commitment to binationalism and living alongside peacefully with the Jewish and the Palestinian population was very clear. And he is the example that I usually go to, which is really interesting because The Atlantic actually wrote a whole article on me deploying the Albert Einstein example, saying that this was actually wrong, that Albert Einstein was a huge Zionist and loves Israel, and I was lying about his background. Are you familiar with some of the things that Einstein has said about?
I've read his writings. I have to say I'm a bit of a skeptic about the possibilities of coexistence.
We're going to get to that as well.
Between the Jews and the indigenous Arab population, because there was such a sense of contempt for Arabs, Muslims, the indigenous population, and such a sense of a double kind of superiority by the Jewish settlers. There was the superiority of being European.
Yeah.
And then that was compounded, or you might say determined by the sense of Jews feeling superior. That sense of superiority born of a certain notion of Jews being chosen people. And then there was just the sense of the backwardness of the Arab Muslim community in general. So when you fill out the historical picture, the probability of a real coexistence among equals, I think, was not really very plausible. There were some individuals who weren't bad. The first head of the Hebrew University, a fellow named Judah Magnus, I think he was a pretty decent fellow so far as I can tell reading his stuff. But I don't think it was really very possible. I think the most honest formulation came from now a right-wing Israeli historian. He wasn't always right-wing. Benny Morris, who you've
had the pleasure of debating.
Yeah, he said that the idea of transfer transfer is the euphemism for expulsion.
Mm-hmm.
He said the idea of transfer was inbuilt and inevitable in Zionism. I think that's a more honest reckoning
Mm-hmm.
of where things stood back then. So I'm not a believer that there's a real possibility of coexistence, though it's never been. It's certainly got much uglier in recent years. You could say the ugliness is either more honesty or, the expression that hypocrisy is the complement that vice pays to virtue. The older generation, they weren't so in your face. You mentioned Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin he would be considered now. He would be considered now the far left in Israel.
Yeah.
He would.
But that,
during his first term of office, he was elected in 1977. When you know what one of his first acts was? He abolished torture. Israel was practicing torture against Palestinian detainees from right after the 1967 war. Now this guy, Begin was...
He's woke, too woke for Israel now.
Exactly. Begin was a lawyer by training, and he was a stickler about the law. And he knew torture was illegal. So he did abolish it. I mean, nowadays, you couldn't even imagine that. It's not even conceivable.
Nowadays, the only time that Israel ever prosecutes any war criminals in their ranks is when they intercept the communications of ICC prosecutors in an effort to utilize the complementarity principle against the ICC to act as though they're doing a show, a mock trial, basically, to hopefully stop the ICC from further prosecuting their war crimes, which again we'll talk about. I wanted to continue in the epilogue.
I want to just return to the Nat Turner analogy. Just as a matter of background, when October 7th first happened, the first couple of days, I don't know if you remember.
Oh, I remember.
Right. The first couple of days, it just looked like a prison breakout.
Yeah.
And they said about 50 people were killed. And, 50 people, that's not even the blink of an eye. So I immediately made my sentiments known that I supported.
I also remember that.
The prison breakout. And I had no qualms about it, no compunction. But then it became clear that something much bigger happened. And when something much bigger happened, it was not, it was hard to try to think it through, to figure out, well, where do I stand? Probably on the order of 1,200 people were killed. I would say it's the evidence is pretty clear. About 850 were civilians.
Yeah.
And of those 850 civilians, as of now, I've read all the available material, overwhelmingly were killed by Palestinian militants.
Yeah.
So that's a large number. You can't get around that. That's a large number. When Sabra and Shatila happened in 1982, the massacre in Lebanon, the initial numbers that came out, they turned out to be lowball. The initial numbers that came out were about 800 Palestinians were slaughtered in Sabra and Shatila. In fact, it was probably closer to 2,000. But even when 800 came out, that was considered a very large number.
Yeah.
And then if you're from Egypt, when Sisi came to power, he committed the massacre at Rabbah Square with the nonviolent protesters. And the estimate by Human Rights Watch was about 1,000 were killed. And that was seen as it was the largest single massacre in Egyptian history. So that seemed a large number.
Yeah.
And now I'm faced with about 850 civilians killed on October 7th. And what do you do with it? What do you do with it? Now, under normal circumstances, namely for the last 40 years, I don't say this with pride, I'm just saying it factually, I normally would have consulted Professor Chomsky. I considered his moral judgment, if not impeccable, near impeccable, and I usually deferred to his moral judgment. But he wasn't available. And I was sweating for around a week because I knew a lot of people were going to want to know what I think. And I was torn. I was torn between the fact I knew from having spent about the last 20 years, I knew what had been done to the people of Gaza. I knew the details, the horror of what those folks endured. On the other hand, there was a mass slaughter. And what do you do with it? And I thought, and I thought, and I thought. I walked the streets trying to figure this out. And it happened that the last book I had written was on wokeness, and I had read a lot about the abolitionists. And I had read, of course, about Nat Turner. So I turned to Nat Turner, the rebellion, and I said, you know what? Roughly, it's about the same thing. What the slaves endured was not much different. You know, Gaza from 1948, when it was under Egyptian rule, from 1948, it was repeatedly described as a concentration camp by outside visitors. Even the extreme right wing, head of Israel's National Security Council, Giora Eiland, who's still among us. He's one of the advisors. He was one of the advisors during the Gaza genocide. He described in 2004, he described Gaza as a concentration. He said it's a huge concentration camp. So now I knew what they had endured. I knew there had been a massacre, a slaughter of significant dimension. And then what do you do with it? I saw Nat Turner rebellion seem more or less analogous. The First Order, kill all white people. And that's what they proceeded to do. They went from house to house, smashed the skulls of women, killed men. Even in this case, they did behead babies. Not on October 7th, but during the Nat Turner rebellion. So now I have the analogy, but then there's a second step. You got the analogy, where do you stand on it? And I thought the right place to look were the abolitionists. They were of sublime moral character. They were courageous, they were consistent, and they were very smart. You don't get people smarter than Charles Sumner, Frederick Douglass. They were really impressive. And when I went back to read their writings, what became very clear was they would not condemn Nat Turner.
Yeah.
They would not. They condemned the white system that forced Nat Turner to do what he did, that the coercive system that created Nat Turner. And then I felt, okay, if I'm wrong, then the white abolitionists and black abolitionists, they're wrong.
Including Frederick Douglass.
You know, Frederick Douglass is an interesting case.
Yeah.
Because the abolitionists were against violence.
Yeah.
They believed in what they called moral suasion. But Douglass described Nat Turner as one of our glorious martyrs, one of our revolutionary fathers. Same thing, W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yeah.
They all acclaim Nat Turner. And what's also interesting is the black people at the time, they did not condemn Nat Turner. They were
Nat.
Exactly.
Well, I know that from your book.
Yeah. He came to occupy a place in African American folklore, and he became a folk hero. They would refer to him as, quote, Old Nat's War. Old Nat's War. Because they understood, whatever the methods, whatever the horrors, and as you quoted William Lloyd Garrison, he recognized horrors occurred. But where did it come from ultimately? What was its deep source? Its deep source was the desire for freedom, the struggle for human dignity. Maybe it was wrongly expressed, but there's another question. What option did they have? What option, if you're speaking honestly, what option did the people of Gaza have? They tried diplomacy. They tried international law. They tried nonviolent civil resistance. They tried everything. And it was all a dead end. And as you probably remember, by October 6, 2023, the only game in town was, would the Saudis join the Abraham Accords?
Yeah.
Gaza had been forgotten. And then the rest is, so to speak, to quote the cliche, the rest is history.
Going into this analogy a little bit further, because you brought up the fact that binationalism was destined to fail from the start, given the supremacist attitudes from early Zionists, doubly supremacist considering that there is the European colonialism aspect to it, but then also Jewish supremacy directly. I agree with that, but we live in the United States of America, which is
You're totally right.
a country that is objectively white supremacist in its fundamentals, and yet we now live in a country that has obviously a very complex history and still continues to struggle with offering any kind of real restitution to Black Americans. And yet I always go back to that same comparison about the end of the abolition of the apartheid. And that is what that is part of the reason why I present the one state solution and, you know, forcible reintegration of everyone, including the oppressed and the oppressor, living side by side in a, you know, secular solitary state as the true North Star. Now, of course, what's more important from my perspective is how the Palestinians feel about that. And there is not that big of a commitment to a one state solution. I think for the most part, historically, it's always been a two-state solution. There are additional complications that come along with that. But if we're just simply talking about the morality of it, or maybe even pie-in-the-sky idealism, the reason why I believe in the abolition of the occupation and the apartheid, with, of course, reparations offered to the Palestinians, a right to return and everything else, not dissimilar to what Avi Shalem has also talked about, is because I'm an American citizen. And if it can happen here, and although there are still many issues, I think the contemporary Black experience is probably better than the current experience of a Palestinian, both in the West Bank and certainly in Gaza as well. So I feel like that is a path towards progress. It would require tremendous amounts of outside pressure from not only the international community, specifically the United States of America, American Jews as well, with connections back to Israel, familial connections. But that is what I believe. You're saying that is not possible because Zionist fascism is far too powerful of a force in Israeli society.
I wouldn't use the word fascism only because I don't believe it's the relevant term. I think Jewish supremacy, the better description. The question, I think it comes down to this, and it's a judgment call. Remember, we had two processes in the United States. You referred to the African-American experience. They came as slaves. A civil war freed them legally, then set in the system of Jim Crow, which meant de facto things were better than slavery, but not significantly better than slavery. Yeah, apartheid. And then the civil rights movement. And now I think you have to be very dogmatic to the point of blindness to say there hasn't been any improvement in the situation of African Americans.
Of course.
Since slavery, since Jim Crow, and even since the civil rights movement. So that's one trajectory. Mm-hmm. There's a second trajectory, the Native Americans. And the Native Americans, it turned into a zero-sum game. Either it's them or us. Was there a possibility with the Native Americans, not African Americans, was there a possibility with the Native Americans of a kind of synthesis, symbiosis, transcendence? Speaking honestly, I think the answer is no.
Yeah. Noam Chomsky has brought this up as well, where he says that unlike the apartheid in South Africa, where there was utility to the Black population, which is 90% of the entire population as a part of the labor force, Israeli society broadly just wants to ethnically cleanse the indigenous population and would rather hire outside labor from Thailand or numerous other places around the country, around the world. So yes, it is a.
So I don't know which is the right analogy.
Yeah.
It was very striking to me when I was reading about the abolitionists, including Douglas, by the way. They were very, very harsh on the Native American. they didn't have any good words or kind words to say. They all saw them. I'm talking about Douglas, Sumner, the others. They all saw the Native Americans as savages. And it was, if the Euro-American project was to advance, they had to be pushed aside. It was zero sum. There was no notion that we can live together. So the question is, which is the Israeli experience closer to? I'm inclined, look, I don't want to be totally pessimistic about it, and I recognize people change. Let's say you could say Germany and Japan were horror shows during the first third of the 20th century. They were, you could say, at the extreme end of imperialist, racist countries, okay? You could say, okay, Germany and Japan, they're no longer horror shows. That's true. And they're probably in the more Pacific end of the political spectrum. But the Jewish question was solved. It was solved by their extermination. So they didn't have to contend with it
There's
anymore.
also still a lot of residual racism in Japanese society as well.
Right.
I'm not even talking about the German philo-Semitism,
right.
Yeah.
Look, there are all sorts of nuances, but the bottom line is, yes, it's true. Germany today is very far from what Germany was in the 1930s, but it's also true to say the Jewish question was solved. It was solved by their extermination. The Native American question was basically solved in our country by their expulsion and significantly, not entirely, but there were significantly elements of extermination. So I'm not sure. As I say, I don't want to be totally pessimistic, though one thing I am totally pessimistic about, the current mindset of the Israelis, it's just off the charts. One thing I think is there are several misunderstandings about the conflict. And one misunderstanding is it's not a war. There was never a war in Gaza. Every time you use the word war to describe what happened in Gaza, you become wittingly or unwittingly a tool of Israeli propaganda.
Yeah.
Once you say war to describe the unfolding of events, Israel has won 90% of the propaganda battle. Once we two are sitting here, you may say you're against what's happening. I say I support what Israel is doing in Gaza. But if we establish as the common language the war in Gaza, Israel has won 90%. There was never a war in Gaza.
Yeah.
A war denotes something very clear. It denotes you're trying to inflict a military defeat on the opposing army. That's what a war is, to inflict a military defeat on the opposing army. Now, in the course of a war, civilians sometimes get killed. That's called, the technical term, collateral damage.
Yeah.
Also, virtually every war, but not every war, but virtually every war, has a terror component. That is, you're targeting the civilians in order to break the will of the other side. But even when you have a terroristic component, the goal is to inflict that military defeat. A genocide is kind of just the opposite. The goal of the genocide is to exterminate the civilian population.
Yeah.
It's not collateral damage. It's not even a secondary component like in terror bombing. It's the goal. And defeating the military in a genocide is completely secondary. You're not trying to defeat the military in a genocide. You're trying to extinguish the whole population.
Yeah.
So if you take the case of Gaza, I know there are a lot of people on the left who like to say, Hamas is resisting and Hamas has put up a resistance and Israel hasn't achieved its aim. That's just fantasy. If I were to ask you, you followed events closely since October 7th. Can you name me one battle in Gaza? A battle. Have you heard of a single battle in Gaza? I haven't. I follow it every day.
Electronic Intifada does a decent job of covering some of the ascetic on the ground resistance elements, but you're right. It's not like a real battle.
I believe it's fantasy.
Yeah,
and the problem is it's not just fantasy. It feeds the Israeli propaganda because they can keep saying Hamas is not yet disarmed. We won't leave Gaza until Hamas is disarmed. Yeah. And you give them a pretext. You give them an excuse to protract the genocide. So there, I believe, that's one misunderstanding of the nature of the conflict in Gaza. And there was a second, but it just slipped my mind. It'll come back to me in a moment, I'm sure, where I believe that you have to get the language right. Yeah, to understand what happened there.
Yeah, it's always been an ethnic cleansing campaign from the Nakba onward, and even before that, pogroms here and there. It was always settler colonial ambition, and
I would say that there, as I say, I agree with Benny Morris. Yeah, the idea of transfer was inevitable. Yeah. Now there were periods when they were willing to settle with. Confining the population, keeping, as I said, to keep as much of the land and as few of the people. Yeah. What made October 7th different was Israel changed its strategy. Its strategy up until October 7th was, and they're very open
mowing
about
of the lawn.
Yeah, was mowing the lawn. Yeah. Periodically, they'll go in and remind the natives who's in charge. Yeah. Or even just use Gaza as an excuse for various other goals they had. But after October 7th, they decided now we're going to solve the Gaza question. Yeah. And solving the Gaza question was very clear. They were very clear about from day one. They were going to, instead of mow the lawn, they were going to extirpate. For your listeners, extirpate is the fancy word for pull out by the roots. Yeah. They were going to extirpate every blade of grass in Gaza, and including the 1.1 million children. And that was their goal. And then their means, their method of carrying out this massive ethnic cleansing, the means was genocide. It was going to intentionally target the civilian population for destruction until and unless Gaza was emptied out of its Arab population.
Can I ask you something about October 7 in particular? Because there is two different schools of thought on this, where some people have looked at the prior knowledge that the Israeli security forces must have had. There was obviously talks of Egypt giving a forewarning, an advanced warning. Unit 8200 was surveilling Gaza. Gaza is the most surveilled territory on the planet, pretty much, an open-air prison, a concentration camp. What is your assessment on whether or not this was utilized as an opportunity where there was forewarning, there was advanced warning that a military campaign could take place by the Palestinian Resistance Front, and that Benjamin Netanyahu would probably try to use this as a opportunity to create casus belli to carry out the final solution to the, I guess, Palestinian question?
Well, first of all, we're going to be here for a while, and you should feel free to ask me any questions. You said you were scared, but you should overcome.
No, I'm getting more confident. I'm getting more comfortable.
You should overcome your fear and be aggressive in your questioning. And these questions, I'm sure, come up, what you just asked me, they come up with your listeners. And here's an opportunity not for me to give the definitive answer, but certainly to give an informed opinion on the subject. First of all, let's take an analogy. Analogies are never perfect. They serve a purpose. If you look at 9/11, there were many people in the administration who predicted Osama bin Laden would launch an attack. Yeah. There There was one national intelligence fellow, I forgot his name. He wrote a book on the subject where he said, I knew from day one, from the moment it happened. He said, he ran into the Oval Office and he said, it's Osama bin Laden. I know it's Osama bin Laden. He had been on their radar and they had received warnings that something like this would happen.
The Northern Forces in Afghanistan had actually tried to deliver Osama bin Laden to the United States of America for his, I think, cooperation in the previous World Trade Center bombing with the Blind Sheikh, and those people were assassinated prior.
I don't recall that detail, so you'll forgive me.
Yeah.
The thing is, when you're a country like the United States and Israel, you're being bombarded with threats, possible threats, potential threats every day. And then you have to have a hierarchy, which you're going to take seriously and which you're not going to take seriously. No, when you're so saturated with racism, like people like Netanyahu and his folks, they don't believe Hamas could pull something like that off.
Yeah.
Hamas was a shooting gallery. I mean, Gaza was a shooting gallery for Israel.
Yeah.
It was, as I called it, these were high-tech killing sprees, which they used to launch into Gaza. You know, the discrepancy in number killed, like 100 to 1, 200 to 1. They didn't think Hamas had the capability, the capacity to pull off something like that. So I'm sure they received reports.
I don't think Hamas thought that they had that capacity as well.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So
They admitted it as such.
They were shocked by how easy it was.
Yeah.
You know?
So how much of that do you think is hubris, and how much of that do you think could have been maybe hubris paired up with opportunity?
Well, you know, there's a cliche. The cliche goes, every crisis is an opportunity. When 9/11 happened, they got together in the Situation Room. Cheney, Rumsfeld, Colin Powell, and they shed 4 or 5 salty tears. And then they rubbed their palms. No, seriously.
Yeah, no.
What can we get out of it? What can we get out of it? And they then start contemplating. If you read the accounts, they're looking at the map. Which country should we attack? Which country? A crisis is an opportunity. Now, as you know, the big opportunity for them, it started with Afghanistan, but Afghanistan was small change. They were going to go after, in their minds, it was going to be Iraq, Syria, Iran. That was what they were going to. They were going to exploit everything they could out of 9/11. And that was exactly the Israelis. It was going to be first Gaza, if the opportunity arises, the West Bank, and then it's going to be Hezbollah, Syria, Iran. Every crisis is an opportunity, but I don't think there's any rational point in denying it was a real crisis. And they're just not the type, because they attach such value to a Jewish life and no value to any non-Jewish life. They're not the type that would allow
sacrificing the envelope. So that's actually really interesting. I agree with you 100% on this. My attitude on this has been part hubris and part, at most, it would be a couple people that get slaughtered as a sacrificial lamb to enact a much larger campaign of death and destruction, and this will be the casus belli. But it, of course, unfolded in a way that the Israeli security apparatus could not have predicted, that Hamas itself could not have predicted as well. And perhaps that's like the middle ground. I don't know. But that's my assessment. I'm not married to the idea either, but I don't believe that it was like pre-planned, that Benjamin Netanyahu was allowing 1,200 Israelis to be killed, with as many civilians that were killed in the process as well. The part of the reason why I bring this up is because there's some information about like the Nova Festival, adding an additional day, being so close to the border wall, and things of that nature have raised suspicions, even inside of the Israeli population as well. There have been some inquiries.
The Nova, for your listeners, it was a music festival, the Supernova music festival.
Yeah.
And the largest number of people killed by far in the total was about 350 of the total number of those killed. As far as it's known, Hamas didn't even know what was going to happen. They just stumbled on it, the Nova Festival. It probably, you could speculate, but it probably enraged them.
Yeah.
Right, bordering on this concentration camp, all these young people who are overwhelmingly of military age, because the Nova was young men and women, they're all having this festival. It almost feels like a taunt. And so it was very bloody.
Oh, yeah.
No question in my mind about it. But I don't think, as far as I understand, they were not knowledgeable that that festival was going to happen. I think there's a tendency on the left, and not just the left, actually across the political spectrum, to always want to see conspiracies. And I think a lot of things happen which actually, in politics and history, which can't be explained. They cannot. There are all sorts of, so to speak, loose ends. I can't really explain how that happened, but it doesn't change the total picture. I remember, if I can give one anecdote, there was a famous trial in the UK. There was a Holocaust denier. His name was David Irving, very prominent historian.
Deborah...
and Deborah Lipstadt.
Yeah, Deborah Lipstadt.
David Irving was an extremely smart guy. I mean, I wouldn't call him brilliant, but he was definitely a competent historian. Deborah Lipstadt's just a talking cow. She's a complete imbecile.
For those of you who don't know, she was Biden's anti-Semitism czar, and also a horrifyingly right-wing, genocide denier herself.
I wouldn't even dignify her with hollow. She's just an imbecile, In any event,
she's the one who's made the Bieber jokes and has very vociferously defended Israel's genocide.
Yeah. Oh, she defended. It's like talking about somebody in the Jewish nursing home in Miami defending it. In any event, so there's a point in the trial. David Irving conducted the trial himself. He was the defendant. By the way, in the trial, the lawyers would not let Deborah Lipstadt speak. She was in the gag order, her own lawyers, because they knew the moment she opened her mouth, they're going to lose the case because she's a complete imbecile. In any event, there was a point in the trial where one of the leading historians in the Nazi Holocaust, his name is Christopher Browning, and David Irving presents Browning with a document. And the document seems to say the opposite of what it should say. And Irving looks at the document and he says, "You're correct. It does say exactly the opposite of what I would have guessed." So Irving said, "How do you explain that?" And you know what Browning said? "I can't. I can't. There are all sorts of things that happen which there isn't a clear explanation. But that doesn't mean the overall picture is wrong. A Nazi Holocaust did happen, even if you can't explain this or that document." And it's the same thing. I believe that what happens with conspiracy theories is they take one point here, one point there, and then inflate it to prove the whole thing could not have happened. No, the whole thing did happen, but this point and that point can't really explain it. Can't really explain it. I believe is it's a problem with these conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Overall, I think the picture is pretty clear, though I acknowledge, we should be careful about this. Not careful, cautious. Israel has never led an international human rights investigation of what happened. They've not let them in. So we're relying in significant part on testimonies which human rights organizations received over the web, in front of a computer screen.
Yeah.
And on an Israeli information. But as I said, on what we know so far, I think the general picture is a slaughter of a significant magnitude occurred.
Yeah.
The question is not whether the slaughter occurred. I believe it did. It's explaining it, understanding it.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to do in the book, to try to make sense of it.
As far as the slaughter goes, I don't think people deny that. Or I guess maybe there are some
No,
who,
there were quite a few.
I guess there are some people who want to operate under the boundaries of perfect victimhood in some respects, where they also think that resistance is supposed to be perfect, which is something that I've brought up over and over again. And I've actually been yelled at quite a bit by the likes of Josh Gottheimer. I've been, the ADL has been after me for the past 3 years, and they've created this glossary for me as the arch anti-Semite, as they call me. Which is laughable because I've spent my whole life combating fascism and combating anti-Semitism as well. And one of the things that they constantly go back to, and this ties into the second chapter of your book that we're going to get to in a second, is at the time I was talking to people in my audience in a relatively hostile environment where they were frustrated with me, and they were saying, like, why don't you just reflexively deny that the likelihood that rapes happened at all? And there's this moment where I respond to them and say, look, at the time, we did not have enough evidence for whether it had happened or not, but there was certainly evidence unfolding that there was no systematic mass rapes that had taken place at the directive of Hamas leadership. That was very clearly something that you also point to in chapter 2 of your book, where you extensively cover the ways in which the propaganda apparatus greatly overemphasizes these heinous sexual crimes that took place with very little evidence at the time to tie it back to white supremacist birth of a nation comparisons were made. The barbaric indigenous forces are engaging in sullying the superior women of the Israeli population. I responded with, it doesn't matter if rapes happened on October 7. That doesn't change the calculation for me at all. Whether or not they happened at the time, we didn't have enough evidence. But even if it did, it wouldn't justify genocide. And that's something that to this day, CNN and all of these other outlets love utilizing as a quote that they clipped out of context to say, oh, like, it doesn't matter if rapes happen on October 7. And I find that very frustrating, as a way to try to create an environment of censorship through bullying of this sort. But I really appreciated the amount of detail that you, the amount of attention you gave to the ways in which the UN commissioned these reports, specifically detailing sometimes falsehoods that were then discredited after the fact. And I want to hear your perspective on why you thought that it was important to at least take out one of the ways in which I think Western media and a lot of international organs of justice supposedly played a role in aiding and abetting the propaganda of Israel to justify Israel's genocide.
Well, that's a large question. And you're going to have to keep me on point because there are several issues that you raised. First of all, the first 2 points you made are completely correct, in my opinion. Number one, rapes could have happened.
Yeah.
People who I have high respect for, when the issue first came up, I was skeptical. I was skeptical on personal grounds. Okay? I had been to Gaza. Remember, and here we can disagree. Okay? The scenes that they were describing, they were kind of like this kind of frat boy bravado, gang rapes, cutting off a woman's breast, playing touch football with the woman's breast.
Rabbi Shmuley.
Yeah, I had been to Gaza. I knew the young men there. And the kinds of scenes that they were describing seemed to require a kind of sexual self-confidence that didn't seem to click with the young men in Gaza. So from the beginning, I was a bit skeptical. But then friends of mine, I won't name them, people you know, They say, look, Norm, in times of war, crazy things happen, rape happens, sexual violence happens. No reason to assume that it didn't happen here. So, like you,
That was my initial assessment as well.
So like you, I agreed on that point at the beginning. I didn't accept it, but I saw it as a plausible possibility that I had to be open. Number two, you're absolutely correct. In the big picture, listen, we all agree killing people is worse than raping them. That should be pretty obvious. As a crime, murder ranks higher than rape. Now, some people say don't rank them. No, we always rank them. That's why we have homicide, murder, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, third-degree murder. We're always making hierarchies of crimes. We have misdemeanors. If 1,200 people were killed, that's horrible enough. It's not going to change the big picture if rape and sexual violence happen. It's wrong, it's terrible, but the big picture was horrible enough, which actually raised a very interesting question. The interesting question is, if it didn't happen, why did Israel make that their litmus test? That's where they threw down the gauntlet. You had to agree that sexual violence, including rape, happened, or you became the equivalent of a Holocaust denier. And it was an interesting question. Why did you make that your red line? There were so many other red lines, killing children, and all sorts of other, pretty terrible things that happened on October 7th. Why did they make that the red line? And that brings us to the next question. Why did they make a red line of something that didn't happen? That to me is a point of reflection. If you look at the record, and I've gone through it as closely as possible, if you look at the record, what do we know? Let's start with the basics. There's no forensic evidence of rape. Now, Israel had a plausible explanation of that. The plausible explanation was they weren't prepared for a crime of this magnitude, 1,200 corpses. And so they processed the bodies very quickly to prepare for the ritual death, the ritual burying.
Yeah.
Okay? They didn't preserve any bodily fluids and any other signs that a rape had occurred. I don't know if it's true or not, but I would say it's certainly plausible. So I was willing to set aside the absence of any forensic evidence of rape. So now you have no forensic evidence of rape. That's going to leave for material evidence. We'll leave witnesses aside for a moment. Material evidence, there's what Pramila Patten, who was the UN Special Envoy, she says very late in her report, she says, no medical legal evidence of rape. And then that brings us to the second material evidence of rape, and that is digital evidence. Now, digital evidence is a very interesting case. So listen up. The most recent report that came out by an Israeli, Dr. Elkayim Levy, she says we have 10,000 photographs and digital segments from October 7th. 10,000. She also says it would take 1,800 hours to go through all of that digital and photographic evidence from October 7th. Now, if you do the simple calculation, which I did, and I was going over it in my mind last night to make sure for your show I don't get it wrong. You know, if you were a single researcher and you were working 8 hours a day, every day of the week, including weekends, you know how long it would take you to go through all of that digital evidence?
How long?
More than 7 months. And it was a very confined area. It was the Gaza envelope.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as a first approximation, you could say, not much could have escaped the collective lens of 10,000 photographs and digital segments,
including GoPro camera footage from the militants themselves.
Yeah, we're going to go through CCTV,
Yeah.
traffic cameras, iPhones, on the militants themselves, body cams, dash cams, GoPros. So now, where was the digital? There isn't one. I hope your viewers will hear this, your listeners. There is not one single frame of Hamas committing rape or sexual violence. Bear in mind, there's not only just an absence of any digital evidence, which would take 7 months to go through, of all the various technological paraphernalia, CCTV, traffic cameras, body cam, dash cam, GoPro, not one, not one of rape, not one of sexual violence, not one frame. Now, here is the thing that's most perplexing. So in that most recent report by Dr. El-Kayem Levy, she says that Hamas instrumentalized all of this digital evidence to terrorize Israeli society. They purposely posted horrific pictures on their social media.
Mm-hmm.
They sent pictures to family members. So if Hamas had any pictures of sexual violence or rape, they should have posted it, according to her. That's what she said. They were purposely posting horrific images to terrify and terrorize Israeli society. They didn't post anything. So what is the only, in my opinion, what's the only possible conclusion? If they didn't post any, it's because they didn't have any such images. And if they didn't have any such images, it's because it never happened.
Yes, including the body camera footage that Israel also extracted later down the line as well from some of the militants. Some of the militants that were captured.
They captured and killed. They took the cameras.
Yeah.
There was nothing there. Now, you might say, well, Hamas didn't want to damage its reputation by filming that stuff, but there's a problem with it.
But Israel would present this as evidence.
So you can make the argument maybe they turned off the camera. I don't believe it for a moment. But the problem with it is you said that they were instrumentalizing these pictures in order to terrify and terrorize. So they wouldn't have turned off the camera. They would have purposely photographed it and then transmitted it.
Yeah.
So by their own argument, it couldn't have happened. Now, as I said, there's...
So let's talk about the why.
The why.
Why was rape, sexual assault, like sexual assault directed by Hamas? Why was that the initial line of attack in your by your estimation from the Israeli side?
I think there were basically two reasons. First of all of Israeli propaganda is directed at American society. And in the United States, the rape, the dark-hued Arab raping a virginal white woman, it has a deep historical resonance. So it was going to play well here. The second reason, and I probably will get criticized for this, it's because of the woke culture. And that's what I think happened with the UN investigations, what happened with the Human Rights Watch investigation, what happened with the Amnesty investigation, that they, because Me Too, believe women, you're not allowed to question, they don't like Muslims to begin with, these liberal organizations. They don't. I mean, we should be, I can speak at length about the relationship. The human rights organizations had a very different relationship with the West Bank than they did with Gaza. Because in the West Bank, Ramallah is like another metropolis, has a higher standard of living than most big cities in the world. They can relate to that secular culture in Ramallah. They can't relate to Gaza. And so there's always been, by the liberal, secular human rights organizations, the UN Commissions of Inquiry, there's always been a double standard when it came to Gaza. So I think that There was a certain kind of certainty that you could play that card and get away with it when it came to sexual violence and rape, which you couldn't, which in other aspects, the human rights organizations were in bed in their investigations. It was this particular issue where they capitulated, and I think they capitulated because of the woke culture.
So you then...
I mean, there were points where it's just complete. I mean, it was really, I have to say, it was stomach churning. So they want to prove, let's say, take the case of the UN Commission of Inquiry. It was headed by Navi Pillay, who was the former High Commissioner for Human Rights, a respected figure in South Africa. She's a South African of Indian descent. So she knows there's no evidence of sexual violence. She knows that. She knows there's no forensic evidence, there's no digital evidence, but she has to go along with the woke culture. So what does she do? She says, well, we saw pictures of women hostages who were taken and that they were placed on motor scooters or motorcycles between two Hamas militants. So you think to yourself, yeah, okay, there's a woman placed between, and we all know taking hostages is wrong, not a complicated question. But what does this have to do with sexual violence? By placing two Hamas militants in the front and back of her, Hamas was guilty, expression, coerced intimacy. Okay, taking hostages is wrong. But is there a new rule of international law? If you take a woman hostage, you have to book an Uber? I mean, this is just stupid. But they were so desperate, clutching at straws to come up with an argument. And as I said, I think it was in large part, first of all, it's the revulsion against Muslim men. And they were honest about that, by the way. They said in the human rights reports that Israel in particular was targeting Muslim young men and older men. That was clearly a target. I think they even called it acts of extermination or crimes against humanity. But the truth of the matter is they all carry that prejudice. And the Israelis knew that prejudice would resonate in the American, in the United States in particular. And the truth is very few people challenged it. I mean, there were people who challenged it, no question about it. But it took a certain amount of, I don't want to call it courage, but you knew that you were going against the current. People like Sheryl Sandberg, the former chief operating officer of Meta, best known for her book Lean In.
Yeah.
She did this documentary called Screams Before Silence. It was just complete nonsense.
Yeah, you compared it to D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, arguing that she leans in on primordial racialized tropes of the feral, dark-hued rapist to mobilize Western psychic demons, similar to how Birth of a Nation incited lynchings of black people.
And the thing with Sheryl Sandberg is no fool. We should be clear about that. She attended Harvard. She studied economics. She was the top economics student in her class. Sheryl Sandberg knows what evidence is. This is not some Deborah Lipstadt. This is somebody who has high standards of evidence. But then when it came to this, she just, it's the cause. It's the cause. In the cause, there is the cause and there are the facts. And the facts are trivial things as compared to the cause. And for her, Israel must live. So whether she does it wittingly, unwittingly, I have no idea. But she manages either convince herself that these are facts, or she convinces herself that the cause is more important than the facts. Someone like Alan Dershowitz, who I've had interactions with, and I know pretty well his mind. For Alan Dershowitz, it's just the cause. He knows what. Someone like her, I don't know.
Okay.
What I do know for certain is there's no evidence.
And so on the other side of that, there is also the verified incidents by the UN of sexual violence by Israeli forces against Palestinian detainees in Sdei Teiman, Ketziot, Ofer. However, in March 2026, the charges against these Sdei Teiman reservists were dropped entirely. And this also led to something I call the pro-rape January 6th riots that unfolded in Israel as well. It was a massive controversy. It got very little coverage in the United States of America because, unfortunately, our corporate media is completely complicit in Israel's actions. That I think the initial prosecution of those 6 concentration camps guards were also in an effort to utilize or weaponize complementarity against the International Criminal Court, in my opinion. That's speculative. You may disagree with that. I don't know. I think
you should explain for your listeners what you mean by complementarity, because it's important for people to have clarity about these issues. The way our international legal system works is it says every nation should prosecute its war criminals.
Yeah.
And if it shows good faith prosecutions, then we're not going to interfere. We will let you carry out, and even if you acquit somebody, so long as you show good faith, that you've basically followed the protocol, the procedures, we will defer to the judgment of your national court. So complementarity means if you do your job, we don't need to do our job. We're not going to interfere. But if the evidence is you're not doing your job, then we will. Complementarity is not IM, it's EM, meaning we complete what you didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you didn't do your job, then we're going to complete the job by doing what you should have done. So your point is that Israel sometimes pretends as if it's doing its job, it's carrying out its prosecutions, and therefore the international institutions like the ICC don't have to do their job because you're already doing their job for them. So occasionally Israel will pretend, though in recent times they don't pretend very much anymore.
No. And this was one of those instances where I believe not only did the primary responsible party actually unmasked himself on Israeli television, became a folk hero of sorts. There was a Knesset session, an emergency Knesset session, in which one of the ministers of the Knesset had told a Palestinian minister of the Knesset that that the Israeli concentration camp guards had every right to anally rape and brutalize and murder the Palestinians inside of their prisons as well.
Well, one of the differences between the claims against Hamas and the claims against the Israelis is the Israelis posted a lot of sexual violence on their own social media.
Yes.
The stripping of the Palestinians and things of that sort. They themselves posted it on their social media. That just, in the case of Hamas, as I'm sure you know, the attack occurs on October 7th in the dawn and pre-dawn hours. And so, and also the Supernova Music Festival was a free love festival. That was how it was advertised as a free love festival. So a lot of people were naked when the attack occurred. And so there were naked bodies because they were running. They were under attack, and everyone's, a hysteria, rightful hysteria broke out. So there were naked bodies, for sure. That part I don't contest. The question is, did Hamas order them? Were they engaged in active sexual violence? There's no evidence for it. But in the case of Israel, they posted on the social media the fact that they were ordering them to strip in the middle of the street in front of their families and so on and so forth. So the evidence was there in the case of Israel, but there was none in the case of Hamas.
So on July 15th, 2025, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres released his conflict-related sexual violence report, which blacklisted Hamas. but omitted Israel, despite extensive verified digital evidence of the Israeli military's systematic sexual abuse of bound Palestinian detainees. You wrote that Guterres will henceforth carry forever the stench of a Judas. What were the immediate geopolitical pressures that led to his capitulation, and how did this trigger the sudden resignation of the entire Pillay Commission of Inquiry the day before?
Well, unfortunately, those questions we'll will not know the answer to. What happened was there was a huge amount of pressure put on the Secretary General. He issues an annual report on sexual violence and conflict. And then there's there's an appendix or an annex with the main perpetrators. And the Israelis were determined to get Hamas on that list of major perpetrators of sexual violence in conflict. Now you understand, if they got Hamas on, but they also got Israel on, that's going to cancel the victory for Israel, because they can't boast that Hamas is on without being told, well, guess what? So are you. And so, as typically happens, an enormous amount of pressure is put on Guterres. And this happened many times before in the UN system. I've written about it in regard to Palestine. And I think a lot of the pressure came from women's groups and human rights groups to get Israel put on it. Remember the Pramila Patten investigation. That was the initial claim about Hamas sexual violence. That wasn't the UN commission. That was a special commission appointed by Guterres. And I'm sure the pressure. And what form does it take? I can't tell you. I don't know. Has it happened before? Yeah, there have been many times. Not many, but there have been times that it happened. If you take the case, which most of your viewers and listeners will not remember, in May 2010, a humanitarian flotilla was headed towards Gaza.
Mavi Marmara.
Right. And the lead ship, the flagship, was the Mavi Marmara. Israel attacks the Mavi Marmara in international waters and commits, as is routine for them, commits a massacre among the passengers. 9 people were initially killed. A 10 person was killed later. Large numbers of people were terrorized and so forth. And this time, the UN had a problem. The Mavi Marmara was it was overwhelmingly Turks on it.
Yeah.
It wasn't owned by the Mavi Marmara. That was the Comoros, but it was a Turkish vessel. Okay?
Yeah.
And the head of Turkey, who was still the head, Erdogan, he put a lot of pressure. So Guterres appoints this fake commission to vindicate Israel, to say Israel didn't do anything wrong. And they did the same. Now, after October 7th, he creates this fake commission headed by Pramila Patten, who says that I have documented cases of rape. And then the next step is they wanted to get Hamas on that list, and he capitulated. Now, as I said at the very beginning, Guterres wasn't terrible. He was not. A lot of statements he made were pretty tough. He was a lot better than Ban Ki-moon would have been, his predecessor. He wasn't terrible, but in the moment of truth, he failed Gaza. And then you know what he did? A new report was issued, because it's a periodic report. This time, he put Israel on the list. Now you might be wondering, why did he do it this time? You know why he did? Because he has 6 months left in office.
Oh.
So he has nothing to worry about. The show is over. If you look at the last days of Ban Ki-moon during the various Israeli killing sprees in Gaza, at the very end, the last day, he says something. You take the case of Fatou Bensouda. She was the former chief prosecutor
Of the International Criminal Court.
In National Criminal Court. Her whole term she not only didn't say anything, she fought so hard to protect Israel. And I'll say it because everybody's now acclaiming how Fatou Bensouda resisted and fought back against the Israeli blackmail. That nonsense. She was either being bribed or blackmailed by Israel until when she had 3 months left in office. And then she says, I'm going to investigate what Israel's doing.
Yeah. Would you
They
say
all do the same thing.
So I actually want to talk about something relevant because this is in the news right now.
Kareem Khan is horrible.
So yeah, he initially was the
He
pick.
was horrible. He was Israel's
he was the hand-selected Israeli choice. Yeah. And what's really interesting about that case is that not only was he the hand-selected Israeli choice, that he also actually came in with an immediate concession towards Afghanistan, towards the United States of America, refusing to prosecute certain war crimes conducted there, if I recall correctly. But Benjamin Netanyahu has been going on the American news channels and claiming that Kareem Khan only chose to prosecute Israel after there were sexual assault allegations launched against him in an effort to, revitalize his career, in an effort to gain favor. Do you feel like that was potentially, because it looks like it has the hallmarks of Israeli blackmail, or just blackmail in general, not just Israeli blackmail?
Kareem Khan did nothing during his term, from the beginning of his term of office, in defense of Palestine and Gaza. There was now an ongoing investigation. That was what Fatou Bensouda, she launched an investigation.
Mm-hmm.
He did absolutely nothing. And then he had a problem. The problem was October 7th.
Yeah.
How do you do nothing? You acted with a blink of an eye over Putin in the Ukraine, and you're doing nothing in the case of this genocide in Gaza. So he had to do something to save face. Now remember, you have to laugh. He indicted 3 members of Hamas and 2 Israelis.
Yeah.
3 members of Hamas and 2 Israelis? Would you mind showing me the numbers? About maybe 50,000 killed at that point.
Yeah.
50,000 killed versus 1,000 killed. And there are 3 indictments against Hamas and 2 against Israel. So he had to do something. And then he was punished for doing something. The funny thing is, obviously we can go down 1,000 byways because there's so much to say. So who's leading the charge against Kareem Khan? Ken Roth, the former head of the Human Rights Watch.
Yeah.
He says Khan did terrible things and blah, 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 blah. Now, let me tell you something.
They're going after Turkey as well, not the country, the other guy as well.
Volker Turk.
Yeah, Volker Turk,
right.
Not Turkey.
Ken Roth was so terrible when it came to the occupied Palestinian territories, when he headed Human Rights Watch. It was known, because I suspect this will get back to him, so I'm not going to say with absolute certainty, but many people told me that the only reports he checked personally when it came to the reports produced, the only ones by Human Rights Watch, which are voluminous. I mean, they're covering the whole world.
Yeah.
They're covering the whole world. So it's voluminous. The only reports he checked personally were the ones on Israel-Palestine. And he always, see, what happens is a human rights report has effectively 2 aspects. One, the facts. You send out investigators, competent people, they try to assemble the facts. In general, the human rights reports are good on the facts. Professional people take their calling seriously, recognize they're being watched, so they better get it right, because free media. They're going to be exposed. In general, the facts are done well. Problem is the legal interpretation of the facts. Are you going to call this a violation of international law? Are you going to call this a war crime? Are you going to call this a crime against humanity? There are many gradations. And then the question is the law, how it's interpreted. And Ken Roth systematically watered down the legal allegations against Israel. So now he's attacking Karim Khan. He was better when he headed Human Rights Watch. From what I read, and I have not read the actual legal documents, what the investigative committee did, what the judges decided, Roth makes a credible case, I believe, but I've not read it. He makes a credible case that the investigative body didn't do its job. What the investigative body did, according to him, was they said, Khan said this, the woman said that, Khan said this, the woman said that, but they don't assess the evidence. Yeah. They don't say, what Khan said is not really credible, what she said is credible. They didn't do that. And he said that was part of their job description. They're supposed to also assess the value. I don't know.
Well, it was dismissed initially.
Wait.
I thought.
I listened closely to Francesca Albanese because I trust her.
Yeah.
I think, she both is a woman and concerned with women's issues, and she's also cares about International Criminal Court and the prosecution of crimes. She said there are two separate issues. One, what happened with the women? Was it true? Some say women, some say there were four. But what happened with the women? She says, no, it has to be seriously investigated. We can't dismiss that question. It has to be seriously investigated. Then she says there's a second issue, namely the dismissal of Karim Khan. I'll tell you the truth. The ICC is so corrupt that I don't much care who is the chief prosecutor. Luis Moreno Ocampo, who was their first chief prosecutor, a total crook. Fatou Bensouda, a total crook. Karim Khan, tool of the West. So I remember a very distinguished, I have to always be careful about not dragging people in. I mentioned the name. A very distinguished international lawyer, top-notch, top of the line. He said to me a couple of years ago, he said, the ICC, it's not a court. You know what they used to call the ICC? It's technically, for your listeners, the International Criminal Court, but it used to be called the International Caucasian Court. Because it only prosecuted Africans.
Well, Lindsey Graham openly admitted that when he said, you're not supposed to prosecute white people, or you're not supposed to prosecute Western countries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do I much care whether Karim, the whole thing is a joke, the whole ICC.
Yeah.
Now, I agree with Francesca Albanese. She's correct, in my opinion. She says there are a lot of good people working inside.
Yeah.
That's true. And when Fatou Bensouda was handling the Mavi Marmara case, it was a civil war inside the court. 3 times, not once, twice, 3. 3 times she declared the case closed. She said, I don't want to discuss this Mavi Marmara. She said, it's trivial, it's not important, I don't want to discuss it. 3 times she declared it closed. The court said, you have to open it, reconsider it. Closed again, have to reconsider it. And then the 3rd time she got away with it. There were people inside the court fighting her. So I'm not going to doubt that there are good people inside the ICC. But the end product is International Caucasian Court, with the one exception of Putin.
So can I, do you think that with the current dismantling, the deliberate dismantling and the sanctions that ICC prosecutors are receiving, do you feel like there is an opportunity for backlash from at least some European nations? I mean, they're vassalized entirely, as we've seen over and over again. But do you feel like there's any backlash here that could potentially force the court to appoint a competent prosecutor, or you think it's completely done?
whether it's because of Trump, singularly because of Trump, I don't want to say because I'm not sure. But one thing we can say for certain, and that is the international system right now is in crisis. Now, it's easy to say something like that because it's, it grabs headlines. But I think a sober judgment has to be it's in crisis. So let me give you some examples which will be familiar to your listeners and not always familiar. Let's take the two most recent examples. The whole system is now in crisis. You could say maybe it's in transition or it's on the verge of collapse. Let's take two examples. On November 17th, 2025, the UN Security Council passes a resolution on Gaza. And what does the resolution do? It will shock your listeners. The UN Security Council, after the people of Gaza, having lived since 1948 in what outside observers described as a concentration camp, and then since October 7th, had to endure a genocide, which is still ongoing. On November 17th, 2025, the UN Security Council proceeded to give the deed of Gaza to that retarded ape in the White House, Donald J. Trump. They gave him the deed to Gaza. I mean, it's just, when you read that, once again, I'm walking the streets. What just happened here? He got the deed to Gaza. Do you know, according to their setup, Donald Trump has veto power over any decision that's made on what's called the Board of Peace.
Yeah.
And the UN Security Council, you know what's the only thing it demanded? The only demand it made, it said, here, Gaza is yours. Every 6 months, it says, the Security Council, the Board of Peace, which Trump presides over, should, it doesn't say it must, it should send the Security Council an update on what's happening in Gaza. The entire legal framework for resolving the Israel-Palestine conflict, which had been constructed, you could say as far back as 1948, but certainly as far back as since 1967, it was completely whited out. Completely whited out. If you ever look at UN resolutions, and I can tell you, probably you're not interested, but if you are, a typical UN resolution begins with what are called the preambular paragraphs. And the preambular paragraphs spell out the legal framework for resolving this conflict. The UN Security Council resolutions, the International Court of Justice advisory opinions. It usually runs to, like, believe it or not, because the conflict is so old, it goes back to 1948. Yeah. It runs to like 7 or 8 pages of laying out all the decisions, all the resolutions, all the opinions on this conflict. Do you know what happened in this new UN resolution? Nothing. All the entire legal framework was whited out, okay? That to me was the end of the UN. The UN as a, let's call it the political organs of the UN, of which the highest is the Security Council. It was the end. As I said in the last line of the book, the UN Security Council, the UN system has become a rotting corpse after November 17th, 2025.
Yeah, you compared it to the Berlin conference handing the Congo to Belgium's King Leopold II.
They I mean, do you remember when Trump said that I'm going to turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Mediterranean? You remember when and everyone laughed and he got away with it.
Yeah.
They gave him the deed to Gaza. And then the second event, there has been no case of a clear, brazen, flagrant aggression and breach of the UN Charter compared to what Israel and the US did when it launched on February 28th, the attack on Iran. Now, Okay, countries commit aggression. But you know what? There's been no UN resolutions, no UN condemnation. Everyone goes on as if...
Well, there was an attempt to condemn Iran for, I guess, asking for it.
Everybody carries on as if, oh, we have a war here.
Yeah.
But wait, how did it start? You know, in the modern world, it's very tough to carry out aggressions without at least making the pretense of self-defense. The pretense of self-defense. As I often like to point out, even when Hitler attacked Poland in 1939, he fabricated a border incident with Poland because you just can't do that until Israel and the U.S. did that. Was there any outrage? Was there any condemnation of this brazen, flagrant breach of the UN Charter? So the system, in my opinion, the international institutions are losing even a pretense of legitimacy at this point. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, just to be fair about it, has not been terrible.
Well, I was going to ask about your opinion on the vice president of the ICJ, Julia Sebutinde.
Well, I'm going to get to that.
Yeah.
In general, not bad. I was surprised. When I'm wrong, I never have a problem with saying I'm wrong. I didn't think there was a snowball's chance in hell that the ICJ would find that Israel was plausibly committing genocide in Gaza. I just thought, I went through the numbers. Britain, France, the US. I figured Russia won't say anything because of Ukraine. And the Chinese won't say anything because there are claims made about genocide against the Uyghurs. So I figured nobody's going to open up this can of worms. It's never going to happen. I was totally wrong. I was completely wrong. The vote was 15-2, saying Israel was plausibly committing genocide. Not a good record. The same person who said the ICC is not a court. It's a joke. He had high expectation for the ICJ. I couldn't figure for the life of me why he had them. And I will say, without revealing any more information, that he was part of the proceeding at the ICJ during the genocide case. And he was right, and I was wrong. But there are two exceptions. So let me get to those two exceptions. The president of the court, very surprising, was an American, Joan Donoghue. She went along with the majority. If you asked me to predict that, there was no way in my mind the president of the ICJ, hailing from the U.S., was going to say that Israel was plausibly committing genocide. But then what happened? Her term of office came to an end. And you know what she did? She went on the BBC, British Broadcasting program called Hard Talk. And you know what she did in the program? She said, we didn't find that Israel was plausibly committing genocide in Gaza. It was such a despicable, disgusting, shameful, and shameless lie. But as you can see now this pattern. The pattern is the people, when they have 3 months left in office, they suddenly say things that they didn't say for 7 years. She had left the court. But you know what? Now that her term of office was over, she needed a job. And she knew there was only one way she can get a job, which was to remove the stain of having gone along with the majority. When she was on the court, she feels the pressure. You don't want to be the only dissenting vote because it's going to make it look like you're just a lackey of the Americans, which is where she hails from, the U.S. But the moment she left and she was in search of work, she completely betrayed what the court said. She lied. And then there's the case of Judge Julia Sebutinde, who she hails from Uganda. And she does the same function, by the way. She serves the same function as Fatou Bensouda. So just for your viewers' sake, because they may get confused with all the names. Fatou Bensouda, she hailed from the Gambia.
Yeah.
African woman, as you can say. She has what they call intersectional oppression. Well, she has 3 oppressions. She's Black, African, and a woman. So she has 3 oppressions, which means you can't criticize her. And that's why the ICC chose her. Why? Because it had become a laughingstock. They were calling it the International Caucasian Court. So they needed a Black woman from Africa to prosecute African leaders, which she did with a real vigor. Judge Sebatindi, the same thing. You can't criticize her because she's the first African Black woman sitting on the ICJ. No, she's beyond a horror show.
Well, she's also insane.
Well,
Like, I mean, there's no other way to put it. I mean, it was Sepatinte who also recently talked about, or not recently, but talked about how it was God's given right that I believe she's an evangelical.
Yes.
So,
but you never know how much of that is conviction and how much of that is business. I'm not so sure where her evangelicalism comes from. I don't know. I admit that. I don't know. But what I do know is what she was saying in the court was completely outer space, outer limits. Now, some people will say...
Can I give some details from her book here?
Yeah, I want to just mention that I devote in the book, because I'm determined she's going to get removed from the court.
Yeah.
And I devoted 100 pages
yeah.
to exposing her. I want to just say, and then you'll read, but I want to make a comment here. It's an interesting, on a human level, it's an interesting observation, I believe. So, to get back to where we were a long time ago, when his biographers were trying to make sense of Nat Turner, they said of him, Nat Turner was an extremely smart guy. Nobody disputed that. Whites, blacks, they said Nat's a very smart guy. And when one of his biographers, Stephen Oakes, he tries to make sense of why Nat Turner did what he did, he said, inside Nat Turner, there was this huge chasm between what he aspired to be as a human being and what he was destined to be in this, his only earthly a slave. Why do I mention that? I know it sounds like, what does that have to do with Judge Sebatindi? I mention it for this reason. When I started to do the research on Judge Sebatindi, it was clear to my eye that parts of what she was saying was plagiarized. I could tell it was not her. So I went on my social media, or I asked my webmaster to go on my social media and to ask people, because I don't know anything about the web. I don't know how you do research. I don't know search engines. That stuff is alien to me. Would people volunteer to do some research for me on the plagiarism? And a large number of people volunteered of quite impressive capacities, as far as I could tell. And one person sent me 6 examples of plagiarism. One person sent to me 4 examples. One person sent to me 8 examples. And then amidst all of these emails, I get one from a person from Gaza. That's correct. A young man from Gaza. And do you know what he found? 36 pages of plagiarism. And when I read that, it reminded me of Nat Turner. All of the potential and possibility of these young people in Gaza, all squandered and wasted. The huge chasm that separated what they could be, what they could do with their lives, as in juxtaposition to having been born into, languishing in, and destined to die in this God-forsaken concentration camp. So I couldn't use his name in the book because then I knew he would never be able to come to the United States.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to mention it. But he came up with 35 pages of clear plagiarism by Judge Sebatindi, where she's just plagiarizing these propaganda tracks by Israeli so-called legal scholars, and also just outright propaganda.
You also, I mean, some of the revelations are actually pretty insane. My community is very familiar with some of these sources, but yes, there was a lot of pro-Israel sources, but also PragerU videos and Wikipedia. And of course, my audience is very familiar with PragerU. We've covered some of the ridiculous things that they've said.
She plagiarized Wikipedia and included the hyperlink.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. What do you think it says about the ICJ that she hasn't been summarily removed yet?
Well, because first, African woman, black African. Yes, it's true.
I don't think
you can't.
Identity politics plays that much
does,
of a role.
It does. You would be very surprised. You'd be very surprised.
I think there's a cynical weaponization of this sort of thing. Representational politics is like very cynically deployed. It was deployed against Bernie Sanders. There were some things that you wrote in your previous book, some things that I disagree with, some things that I agree with. I think this is changing now. The environment is shifting.
It is changing.
Yeah,
it is changing, but it still exercises a power. Otherwise, how could you say such ridiculous things like coerced intimacy when you have two guys taking care? All right, say taking hostages is wrong. Saying it's a war crime, which it is, fine. But the stuff they were saying was just completely ridiculous. They were saying that women who had combatant positions, they were using this weapon called Site C. It's called Site C, and the UN Commission call them civilians. What do you mean they're civilians? They have a weapon. They're staffing the weapon. You're calling them civilians? It was just completely ridiculous, and it was the wokeness because she was desperate, Navi Pillay, to confirm the sexual violence charge, but she knew she had no evidence. I have no pictures. I have no forensic evidence. So she starts grasping at straws with these ridiculous claims against Hamas.
Well, the language is weaponized in that way, and I think one of the funnier elements of that has been the way that the media covers October 7, where without even a shred of shame, they will write things such as this poor victim was kidnapped from a tank and held hostage. So there is a lot of power in the way that these words are presented. Having said that, however, I will say that there is definitely a newer understanding, especially amongst the younger generation as well.
Agree.
Of the cynical weaponization of identity politics.
I mean, one of the most interesting phenomena is that all of the victories that are now being scored by the, you could say, Bernie Sanders' children, the Mamdanis, now. And
what do you think about Mamdani?
First of all, I think he ran the right campaign. The right campaign was a non-identity politics campaign, although it had an identity politics component baked into it because the candidate's name is Zoran Mamdani.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the platform.
Yeah.
It had an element in it, but it wasn't the platform. And every single victory, your friend Abdul El Sayed, every single candidacy, it's true. It has an identity politics element baked into it. The three candidates that won after Mamdani in the most recent election,
Claire Valdez, Daria Liza Avila Chevalier,
and Landler.
Yeah.
One of them, white male, so no identity politics baked in there. But the other two, yes. The woman in Wisconsin, the Asian woman.
Francesca Hong.
Yeah. There is always that element, as it were, lurking in the background. They do not look like white Americans. But the platform is clearly the Bernie Sanders platform. The only non-economic issue on their platforms, the only one, is Gaza.
Well, even then, there's an economic component to it as well.
Well, yeah,
and
but
I
it's
think,
not. I think it is the moral. It's a moral
no,
torch.
definitely.
Yeah.
But I think in a way to make it more appealing to the masses, there's also a legitimate argument that you can deploy talking about the focus that we have as the American government with respect to how much of our resources go to not only waging endless wars, but
Yeah.
also specifically giving money to
Yeah,
Israel.
totally agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree. So I think the strategy of Mamdani was, so to speak, was pioneered by Bernie. His time had come. He had been saying the same thing since he was a young man. The difference was the times had changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so the times caught up with Bernie's platform. So that to me is a good thing. The problem I have, and look, Mamdani is young. He's feeling his way. I don't know where it's going to end up.
Mm-hmm.
The problem I have is that there's a constituency out there that's so desperate, so hopeless, so abject. They're ready to move. They're ready to act. They desperately need change because the system, for 80%, they've been locked out of our country, has been locked out of the system, about 80%. I don't see Mamdani trying to mobilize that constituency. He mobilizes them only at one point, when there's a primary or an election. His people come out. The people come out. I was surprised. I went to a rally for Brad Landler in Brooklyn, because I'm from Brooklyn, New York. It was basically the rally was Muslim-Jewish solidarity and support for the Palestinians. That was a very strange, for somebody from my generation, for that to be a political rally running for office. I mean, that sort of stuff would sink your campaign,
Oh, yeah.
just 3 years ago. So it was an unbelievable sight. But my thing is,
How do you feel about Brad Lander?
okay, I'm not.
He has a very interesting perspective because he says that he's a Zionist, and yet I feel like he exhausts the logical conclusion of what people say is the two-state solution to its logical limit, where he's seemingly sincere about a minority Jewish population living inside of the what would be outside of the Green Line, the Palestinian territory that's currently occupied by Israel, and then a minority Palestinian population inside of Israel, which throws people for a loop in many instances. I don't know if you saw his Dana Bash interview where he just like sincerely advances that position, which I find to be fascinating. I'm an anti-Zionist. I don't. I've said things that frustrate some liberal Zionists, including the president of J Street and even Peter Beinart, as a matter of fact, where I've made comparisons to Nazi Germany. I want to actually hear your perspective on that as well, given your family history. Or I've said I find Zionism to be ideologically similar to Nazism, and also that liberal Zionism would be oxymoronic, almost similar to liberal Nazism. And Brad, on the other hand, he calls himself a liberal Zionist, and yet will actually present for the first time ever an actual logical conclusion to what a two-state solution looks like. So I wanted to hear your perspective on that as well.
Well, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the theory of Zionism. So I have what you might call a material and a personal stake in the word Zionism. But I don't think it's particularly useful, and I counsel against using it, because in politics, the most important thing is clarity of information. You don't want there to be any misunderstandings. So when people like Bernie Sanders or Mamdani, Abdul El Sayed, their planks are very clear. Medicare for all, and so forth, depending on your running. Mamdani was free buses, free pre-K, very clear. So I'm for, in politics, there should be clarity of thought. I don't believe the term Zionism conveys information.
Yeah.
It just is, it's a term of abuse. It's an epithet. It's not it doesn't isolate a phenomenon. So You might ask me then, well, what term would you use? And my reply is, I think the most useful term, just to give you, you have your producer here or your friend here, and I'm afraid I can get long-winded, and you'll just excuse me. When there was about 10 or 15 years ago now, there was a whole debate about whether or not Israel was an apartheid state. And Human Rights Watch puts out an 80-page report. Amnesty puts out a 200 report. And then I was struck. The Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories puts out a report. It was only and the head of B'Tselem at that point, the Israeli Information Center, the head, he was a physicist. He was a Harvard-trained physicist. Very decent guy. Very decent guy. He never talked to me. I think once he answered an email from me. So I knew he considered me toxic and I would sink his ship. So he stayed away. I don't take these things personally. I get it. I understand politics. But what struck me about his report was he said something very simple. You know what he said? He said, from the river to the sea, there's one state. Let's not kid ourselves. This has been going on since 1967. Yeah. We're in 2026. There's one state. Incidentally, I disagree with you. These territories are not occupied. They are illegally annexed. They are part of Israel. It's not, under international law, occupation has a very different standard than an annexation. They have been illegally annexed by Israel. And then he said, or the report says, that the foundation of this one state, very simple, it's Jewish supremacy. It's a Jewish supremacist state. Now, you could say, in the case of Israel, it's second-class citizens. In the case of the West Bank, it's apartheid. And the case of Gaza, it's genocide or a concentration camp, however you want to put it. But the common denominator is it's Jewish supremacy. Yeah. So I think Jewish supremacy does convey something because everyone remembers white supremacy. Yeah. They remember it from South Africa and they remember it from our own country. We know what white supremacists are. So I believe that we should begin with clarity of language and refer to it as not a Zionist state, but to say I'm against white supremacy.
Oh, well, that's what I do say that. I do believe that that's what Zionism is.
But you recognize other people it doesn't necessarily denote that.
No, of course not.
And so if you want to have a conversation, the first thing you need is clarity of terms. So we're on, as they say, on the same wavelength or on the same page. So I think the right term to use is Jewish supremacy, and you're against Jewish supremacy, which is basically the way Zohar Mamdani handled the question. Yeah. He kept saying, I believe in equal rights for all. Yeah. And then how do you answer that?
Well, a lot of people chose to just immediately shift the priority to, well, don't you believe Israel has a right to be a Jewish state, which is an ethno state?
Right. And his reply was, I support a state with equal rights for all. Yeah. And they didn't know how to answer that. There was like a kind of a deadly silence when he answered, because how do you say, no, I don't support? This is a digression. But it's like when you take the case of Tucker Carlson, he says that the Jews, or some Jews, he says, but the Jews, he says, they want to destroy the United States. That's what he says. They want to destroy it from within.
I think he's a little bit more careful about his language, but I do agree with you, and I do want to get to that.
Okay, so let me tell you. So you're going to answer me, and you of course should answer me. And there are many points he raised which I haven't addressed, but he says these Jews, they want a Jewish supremacist state in Israel, but they want to let all these immigrants into the United States, liberal Jews.
The great replacement.
Right. Yeah. So he says they want to destroy the U.S. from within. I'm thinking to myself, why would they want to destroy the U.S. from within? They control the United States. Why would they want to destroy it? According to you, they occupy,
Yeah.
and which they do, they disproportionately occupy the positions of in industry, in culture, in everything. Okay, that counts. So why would they want to destroy? They don't want to destroy it. What they want was, they want a Jewish supremacist state in Israel because the Jews are the majority, and they want a liberal state here because Jews are just 2% of the population. They're hypocrites. It's not that they want to destroy the U.S., but they want, as a minority, they want to preserve the rights of a minority in a multicultural society like the United States. But
I also don't think that immigration is a negative thing in general. In the way that he presents it, so this is actually a really interesting point because I've heard your criticisms of some on the right. And the way that they are approaching the issue of Palestine, and some of them have even become thought leaders almost.
They are the thought leaders
on this issue, unfortunately. Well, I don't know if I completely agree with that assessment.
If you look at the top, look, this is an area where 10,000.
Look, I got a lot of people watching me too.
Yes, I'm aware of that, and I believe what Chairman Mao said: no investigation, no right to speak. I don't know the specifics. People have sent me some graphs and so forth, which show the top podcasters. The only one in the tier that I saw, and you were not on that tier.
No, I'm not. I'm not considered a podcaster. I'm a Twitch streamer.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's another distinction I don't know. I'm telling you, I have no problem with admitting where I have ignorance.
We must seek truth from facts.
Yeah, exactly. In the top tier, the only person on the what you would call the liberal end of the spectrum was Mehdi Hasan. Everybody else was right wing.
Yeah.
And so by virtue of the size of the audience they reach, just by virtue of the size of the audience they reach, they have become the voice of the Gaza. And that's a very strange phenomenon.
Yeah.
The idea that, for example, Megyn Kelly cares about poor brown Muslim children in Gaza, I just find that very peculiar.
Yeah.
And my problem is, you said I have a problem with the right wing. That's not my problem.
I do. I personally abhor reactionary thought.
That people on the left don't see this as somehow strange and problematic.
I also agree with you on that.
There's no raising of eyebrows, like, what quite is going on here?
Yeah.
And then you have to ask yourself, well, what is going on here? And I think there are issues. I would not call them major issues at this point. I think it's the anti-Semitism is pretty much a marginal phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe, which is within the realm of possibility, I said it before it became a common discussion. I said, if Tucker Carlson wins, if he runs for office, this was before there was any talk about it. I said, but speculating, if he were to run for office, and if he were to run on the real America First, and if he ran with a Thomas Massey or her name just the woman
Marjorie Taylor Greene,
yeah, and he ran on the platform of, like the Nazis did, that they had a solution to the economic crisis.
Yeah.
If the economy crashed, I think there could be a problem. And I don't see any reason why not to raise that prospect, even though I recognize right now it's marginal. I recognize that. And I don't believe, if you look at the history of the Nazi Party, before the 29 crash, it was completely marginal.
Mm-hmm.
It was the crash before they were polling around 3 to 5%. Right after the crash, they polled 18%, then they polled 36%, because it wasn't anti-Semitism that won the Nazis' power. It was they promised they had a solution. So, people like with Trump, let's give him a try. Let's see what he can do, So I believe it could metamorphose into a problem. And I do find it problematic that people on the so-called left don't recognize this as, at the very least,
No, I think they do.
an odd. I didn't find that.
No, well, you're at the epicenter of the people who do. But so here's the thing. I actually agree with you almost 100% of the way, as far as I've heard you talk about how anti-Semitism historically has been an issue, of course, pogroms, the Holocaust, but then also even in the United States of America, there were systematic forms of discrimination that Jews faced. Anti-Semitism in contemporary American society it happens as on an individual basis, but it's not. There's no systemic anti-Semitism in the United States of America.
Quite the contrary. On the contrary, if you're applying for a law firm, if you're applying to work in a hospital, if you're applying to teach, the system is rigged in your favor. You apply to a law firm right now, and if you're Jewish, it helps. It's a plus. So if anything, Jews benefit from a privileged position.
Yeah, and Jews are specifically Ashkenazi Jews in America, which is most of the Jewish people in America, are under the banner of white. Like no one.
I think white plus.
Yeah. Well,
if you ask me,
white plus.
It's true. If you go into a job interview, so if you walk into a job interview and you're black, okay, you have to prove that you're smart because the default setting is you're stupid. If you're Jewish,
you're sounding kind of woke here.
No, well, I think that part is true. If you're Jewish and you walk into a job interview, you have to prove you're stupid because the default setting is you're smart. And you know what? On top of that,
Aiden Ross is doing a good job of changing that.
Most of the time, your interviewers are Jewish. If let's say you're applying for an Ivy League school, your interviewer is going to be quite a significant amount of the time is going to be Jewish, So I recognize that. I think far from being a liability, it's a plus to be Jewish.
So
but on the other hand, everybody walks in with their stereotypes, their prejudices. Yeah. And it may be a plus, but they'll still think you're cheap if you're Jewish. They'll think he's smart, but they'll still think you're cheap. It just has no effect. It has no impact on your life opportunities and chances.
So we largely agree on that. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because
Mr. Piker just agreed Jews are cheap. For those of you,
no. The stereotyping we agree on. I would say that I think that what Tucker is doing is he's one of the most sophisticated propagandists for the white nationalist movement. I've been tracking a lot of. I'm one of the people that you would probably consider woke, but I've been tracking his commentary for many years, almost a decade at this point.
I have not,
and I'm intimately familiar with the things that he says and how he is capable of channeling white supremacist propaganda, but make it palatable for American audiences,
Folksy.
even mainstream audiences, as he did for years and years at Fox News. He became a very dangerous propagandist, and he's very good at what he does. One thing that I've always found very strange about American fascists is the fact that they actually demonstrate the exact ethnic chauvinism and tribalism that they oppose in Israel when they almost offer some of the most scathing, like Nick Fuentes. Are you familiar with Nick Fuentes?
I know him, yes.
Yes, he's a neo-Nazi, self-avowed neo-Nazi.
It depends on the day of the week.
Yeah, sometimes he runs away from the moniker, but
then he's just
let's be real,
one of the guys.
Yeah. So his critique of the ethnic chauvinism or Jewish supremacy is scathing because I think he's very familiar with a worldview that he has, which is almost identical. So from my perspective, I see very little daylight. And this is what really frustrates the likes of Jonathan Greenblatt. He is my Alan Dershowitz, if you will, my primary opposition. What is frustrating to me about that is that Jonathan Greenblatt has the exact same odious worldview of supremacy, of extermination, and a defense of extermination.
Right, but he wants to defend the rights of Jews here because here he's a minority. And in Israel, he wants a Jewish supremacist state.
Yeah.
Now, the thing with people like Tucker Carlson, exactly what you just said.
But I think
They criticize Israel for its Jewish supremacy, but they want a white supremacist state here.
yes, they want to do Israel, but for white people. Richard Spencer, another neo-Nazi, once openly admitted this. He said, I like Israel. I don't like Jews. I like Israel.
Yeah.
I want the American Christian whites to have an Israel here in the United States of America. So there's not a lot of daylight between their framework, which I find very odd.
I get them. I get the hypocrisy. And now I'm going to say something which I'm reluctant to say because, I'm an older man and I don't like to get involved in the internet gossip and wars. It doesn't interest me. I'm a reader and
You don't even have a cell phone.
And I own the cell phone. I've never even used, believe it or not, I've never even used an ATM. And now I'm told ATMs are obsolete, but I never even used it when it existed. I never learned to drive. I never had a driver's license, nothing. I thought the end of the 19th century was a great time, and I tried to, as best as I can, stick to the protocols of that era. In any event, so I'm listening to Glenn Greenwald. And he says, my friend Tucker, he's such a unique person because he always admits when he makes mistakes. And why can't we have other people like my friend Tucker, who I happen to have a close relationship with? And he says, what's his example? He says, well, Tucker has now admitted he was wrong about Muslims. And he's now saying that Muslims aren't bad people, and he's wrong. I think to myself, yeah, that's one possibility. The other possibility is, since he's been busy attacking Israel and Jews, he sees a new demographic.
Yeah.
So maybe he's changed his tune, not because Tucker is so wonderful, because he admits to his errors, but he just made a pragmatic choice that, say he runs for president, it wouldn't hurt to have that demographic on his side.
I don't think it wouldn't hurt to also have the credibility, the established credibility as someone who is, on the right side on this moral stain. Especially because for one reason or another, I think Democrats are still, at least politicians are still very reluctant to speak with clear terms, with absolute conviction on these issues. Sorry, Kaya's here. I don't know how you feel about dogs. She's very friendly.
I'm perplexed.
Yeah, she's a little lady. She's tiny. She thinks she's tiny.
Well, I'm glad she's not in the apartment above mine in my building.
Yeah, she'd be stomping around.
Well, no, she wouldn't. It would be me or her.
Okay. Well, in any case, what were we talking about? We were talking about Tucker Carlson. I think he's establishing credibility to either lend it to J.D. Vance, which he is closely aligned with. And J.D. Vance, of course, has been a critic of Benjamin Netanyahu. He went on the Joe Rogan Experience. He talked about the Epstein files. He talked about how Israel actually plays a major role in American elections and all this stuff. And then a week later, he was smiling next to Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House. So not exactly certain as to how, to how critical he is of the American-Israeli relationship. But I do think that, yes, these guys are very cynical, and this will be a valuable tool to galvanize the masses in a matter not dissimilar.
I believe it will, assuming that there isn't a crash. But if there's not a crash, it will be a marginal. It's like what they described Hitler's anti-Semitism was an add-on. It appealed to a certain pretty marginal, but a portion of the electorate, and it helped. The problem is if there's that crash and you're looking for a scapegoat, and I have said it many times, and I'm not afraid to say that, I believe the Jews brought it on themselves. They carried on in just a completely irresponsible, reckless, racist, bigoted, supremacist way, and it's caused a lot of a lot of animus to rise to the surface.
The association with Judaism and Israel.
I think it was just this kind of completely reckless arrogance. The fact of the matter is, these Jewish billionaire supremacists, they destroyed academic freedom in our universities and colleges beginning in the spring of 2024. That's just a fact. One of the ironies of the current moment is what are supposedly the bastions of freedom of speech in our country, which are the universities, this complete reign of terror. What happened was they weren't able to maintain that reign of terror in our electoral arena. So things that you can't say on a college campus, you can't say on a university campus, you can't say in an election. They were unable, they tried with money to outspend. I guess the figure I read now, Abdel El Sayed, the last number,
$54 million. Specifically, APAC and APAC subsidiaries.
But he said the ratio was 12-1, I believe.
It's even higher in certain areas.
Okay, so they tried to outspend, but they were not able to silence.
Yeah.
The campaigns, the various primary campaigns, which are very harsh on Israel, they were not silenced. In the case of the universities, they threatened to withhold alumni contributions unless the encampments were crushed and all criticism of Israel was crushed. In that case, the money weapon worked. You couldn't say a word. It turns out that our electoral system is less vulnerable to financial blackmail than our universities. Our universities, they shut down all discussion. They were not able to do it.
Well,
they weren't able to do
you
it.
Vote.
What?
At the end of the day, you still vote. And I think the level of enmity towards Israel is too powerful a force.
Say that again?
I think the level of enmity towards Israel, especially in relation to its impact on American politics, is far too powerful of a force that as long as we still go out and cast the vote.
Except that there was a lot of enmity on the college campuses also.
Yeah.
But the financial blackmail of the Jewish billionaire supremacists, it worked. It did not work in the electoral arena. I would also
Don't you
want
think
to
there's
add,
also a financial component there, though?
There was a financial.
Not just direct alumni donations. I'm talking about the entanglements that maybe even a campus like Columbia has directly with Israeli real estate developers, for example.
That is,
like they have a campus in Israel.
What you're saying is obviously true. I, however, believe we have to disaggregate. That wasn't the real issue that came up. The divestment, the BDS, it wasn't the main issue. For the Jewish billionaire supremacist class, the issue was those encampments had captured public attention and it wouldn't go away.
Yeah. You
remember, they just kept spreading and spreading and spreading, and then they were spreading in Europe and elsewhere.
Yeah.
So they wanted to stop that because it was a problem for Israel. It meant if they were spreading, then talk about Gaza was not disappearing. It was growing. So that I think was the issue. For me, the interesting fact was they were able to succeed with their blackmail to crush the dissent, but they were not able to crush the candidacies. They tried, Mamdani was 30-1.
They're still
the
trying.
Spending. It was either 30 or 40 million to 1 million. But the blackmail did not succeed. I'll tell you, I live in an all Jewish neighborhood. And I remember when the Mamdani primary, I had believe it or not, 11, 12, 13 circulars stuffed in my mailbox saying Mamdani's a terrorist, Mamdani is this, Mamdani is that. Him, I got one piece of literature, and it was after the primary was over. You know, so they tried, but they were unable to crush the open dissent in the electorate. And by the way, it wasn't just the universities. You know, I have friends, doctors, nurses, terrified to say anything in their social media about not having nothing to do with the hospital.
I mean, the early days in 2023, there were very high profile firings that took place, and it was almost this shameless endeavor. You had doxing trucks on college campuses that were plastering student faces.
It was only, by the way, it was not only on college campuses. You know what they did at Harvard? They rented the trucks to go into the neighborhoods of their parents.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Students' parents. Like 300.
It's one of the most insane things that I
had to say to myself,
I've never seen anything like it.
I had to say to myself, you know, my parents didn't disagree with my politics. The apple didn't fall far from the trees. But if one of those trucks came in front of their house, my parents would have killed me. They would have killed me.
Yeah.
So they were really so ruthless. And that brings us back to, we're now full circle. A lot of the resentment towards Jews, it has a rational foundation.
It leans into the pre-existing tropes that harken back to an era where there were a lot of falsehoods. Like, it's the same concept as blood libel, which is a real instance of anti-Semitism, blaming Jews for poisoning the well.
Israel targets children in Gaza.
But then, yes, attributing that to something that we can visualize, something that we can see with our own two eyes, like Israel killing children in Gaza, is unbelievably harmful if you care about combating anti-Semitism.
And it's not only harmful to combating anti-Semitism. See, the problem, in my view, is any definition you come across of anti-Semitism, if you were to open up a Webster's, if you were to open up an Oxford English Dictionary and OED definition, they always insert the word irrational, an irrational hatred of Jews, an irrational belief that Jews are this, the Jews are that. Here's the problem. What if a lot of the resentment is rational? What if a state calling itself the state of the Jewish people? What if your resentment at the genocide it's perpetrating, what if it's rational? What if Jews are carrying on in a flagrant, brazen fashion to suppress our right to freedom of speech and using their considerable financial power to do so? If you resent Jews for that, is it anti-Semitism? But it's rational. It's rational to resent people using their financial wealth to crush dissent, to threaten students with suspension, to threaten them with expulsion, in some cases, to threaten them with deportation. In some cases, the students are being absconded with and sent into places God only knows where. When those things were happening, did Bill Ackman say anything? Did he denounce it? Did he say it was wrong what was done to Muhammad Khalil? No, he did not. So, or when Sheryl Sandberg abets the genocide by coming out with this fake film about Hamas rape called Screams Without Silence, if you resent the power that Jews use, is it anti-Semitism? I can't see that it is, because of the problem that every definition incorporates some notion that it's irrational. There's nothing irrational about that resentment. And you say it's harder to fight anti-Semitism. I think the problem is even bigger. The problem is it even anti-Semitism? When an ethnic group uses its financial and its political clout in order to further a Jewish supremacist agenda, is that anti-Semitism? I don't think it is.
So here's where you and I differ on this issue. I am reminded, and I used to use this all the time, of the March 1919 speech that Lenin delivered on anti-Semitic pogroms. And I think this is something that you will agree with me on as well, which is that the socialist, communist, Marxist interpretation revolves around class struggle, and that the obvious scapegoat, the scapegoating of any kind of ethnic minority, in this circumstance being Jews, is a very commonly deployed trope, a commonly deployed tactic, and that no group of people are monolithic. And I think you also agree with me on that as well. And that my understanding always has been, or the way that I talk about these issues always is revolved around the notion that if organized Jewry was this monolithic force, in the way that many Jewish Zionist Americans in key positions of power try to present it as, utilizing the vague interpretation of Zionism, or even saying Israel's a Jewish state, Israel has to remain a Jewish state, Israel has demographic concerns. Why should we care about that? We don't care about that with any other country. As a matter of fact, when Nick Fuentes says we have demographic concerns, or when Tucker Carlson says we have demographic concerns here in America, we understand that as white supremacy. We understand that as white nationalism, and we find it abhorrent.
Totally agree.
So why is there this distinction? The way I approach this issue is, if there was this monolithic understanding, there would not be such a gigantic generational divide, and there wouldn't be billions of dollars invested in ensuring that young American Jews, young Jews in Europe, are indoctrinated into this false understanding, this false notion
listen,
that, you know.
Hasan, Mr. Piker. Of course, what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
I have a credo. It's my own little credo. Never quarrel with facts. What you're saying is true. Okay? And we have to start with that.
Yeah.
The problem is this. If there's a significant number of people carrying on in this way, is it really irrational? And as I said, a part of a core...
that part I don't disagree with you
core
on.
definition of anti-Semitism that's supposed to be irrational. Is it really irrational if people make a leap and say, the way Jews are carrying on is completely outrageous? Does that really shock the conscience when people reach that conclusion? Israel calls itself the state of the Jewish people. So is it so shocking if people conclude that when Israel carries on this way, it's acting...
And its defenders say that they're doing this at the behest of Judaism.
At the behest of the Jewish people? Is that such a shocking conclusion? Yeah. No, I don't think so. And I don't really, at some level, I don't really quarrel with people who reach the wrong conclusion. I'm going to say, okay, my parents passed through the Nazi Holocaust. They lost, on both sides of both sides, my mother and father, lost every single member. To their dying day, they hated every German. Every German. Okay? Did I like that? Not really. Did they ever quarrel with them about it? Never. Did they ever argue with them about that? Never. I understood from their experience. I remember I once asked my mother the question. I was curious. I said, did you ever meet a German during the extermination who showed some sympathy? She thought very hard. And then she said, I remember once a German soldier, he had a look on his face of feeling a little guilty. She said, I remember one. So is it so shocking that she generalized from her experience and hated all Germans? I don't find that particularly shocking. And given what she endured, there was no way on God's earth that I would dare to quarrel with that experience. Did I think it was wrong? Yes. Do I have German friends? Yes. But will I argue? No. And in the same way, will I argue with a Palestinian or a Gazan who hates all Jews? Never. I would never argue with it. That's their experience. I will now not which is totally out of character for me. I will not talk to an Israeli. You crossed the red line. You've gone too far. I've read too many human rights reports. You have targeted, Targeted. You have targeted too many Gazan children. You have targeted too many in their head. You have targeted too many in their chest. You have targeted too many toddlers. Now you say, well, that's generalizing. That's not every Israeli. Well, it's not really, is it not? I've read the polls. The polls show that these polls are taken like every 2 weeks since the Gaza genocide. And you know what the poll showed?
80% support.
5% of Israeli Jews thought Israel was using too much force. 95% said either sufficient force or not enough force. Of those 95%, 40% said not enough force. I can go through many, many polls. Israel, to its no, I wouldn't say honor, but it has a citizen army. I think the citizen army is a correct concept. Everybody should have to pay that ultimate price to defend their country. An army should not be composed of the poor or those who have no futures. So they say you benefit from the independence of your country. Everybody should have to serve to defend the country up to and including the ultimate sacrifice. Okay? But then there's a problem. You have a citizen army. You know what a citizen army means? It's representative of the population. Now, if that citizen army is committing genocide, it's also representative of the population. It's not an unfair generalization to say this is a nation of child killers, to say this is a nation of child murderers. That's a fact. So then you say, well, but the number who actually target children, yes, it's horrible. Yes, it's terrible. The most recent.
No, it's the complicity.
The most recent UN Commission of Inquiry report on assaults on children, they targeted an orphanage, But, okay, you say that's still a handful. But here's a question. It was being reported already in mid-2024. It was already being reported. Israel's using starvation as a method of war in Gaza. Everybody agreed on that. The EU foreign policy chief, Gutierrez, everybody agreed. Israel's using starvation as a method of war. Okay? Now, it's not easy to use starvation as a method of war. You have to seal all their points of entry. You have to blow up food banks in Gaza in order to make that work. The whole Israeli army was implicated. And you know what? You know who you're trying to starve? 1.1 million of those 2.3 million Gazans are children.
Yeah.
You are concretely implicated, or to use your word, complicitous in starving children. Okay, guys, you lost me. If I meet somebody in the street or at the beach, because I'm right near Coney Island Beach, and the person says, I'm from Gaza, I'm from Israel, I walk away. Won't talk. You lost me. So, to get back to your original question.
I'm a little bit too woke for this, and only because it's interesting. I had a very similar, well, not on this issue, but
I'm not proud of, I'm not happy with what I'm saying. On the other hand, I think a line has been crossed. Because I said to you earlier,
there are things that I agree with what you said. I'm just saying that I have a more optimistic perspective in terms of changing people's minds.
Right. I said to you earlier, there are a couple of misconceptions about Gaza. And I said, one of them is it's a war. And I said, there was a second and I said, my mind slipped, but I know it'll come back to me. The second misconception is, as you know, even people like Bernie Sanders, who I like, just like I like Brad Landler, I don't have the litmus test sort of think, are you a Zionist? Are you now, or have you ever been a Zionist? I'm not too caught up on the litmus tests. I want to see a general picture. And in general, Bernie was horrible the first month, horrible the second month, but then he turned around, whether it was public, whether it was because he saw public opinion. He wasn't bad afterwards, except for one thing, which is I'm going to get to now, and which will probably is why you're expressing reservations. And that was the question of who's the problem.
Benjamin Netanyahu.
And it's not Netanyahu.
No, it's not. I know. I'm just.
Yes, I understand, and we're on the same wavelength. It's not Netanyahu. As I've said over and over again, the problem is not the Israeli state. The problem is the Israeli society. Those folks have gone mad. They are psychotic in their relish at the death and destruction in Gaza. The problem is Israeli society. So you may say you're woke, so you're against these generalizations.
No. I just meant, I believe
Israel calls
I believe that you can still change someone's mind.
Israel calls itself the state of the Jewish people. And the problem is the Jewish people of Israel are mad. The kinds of relish they express at the death and destruction in Gaza. To me, I have to tell you, and I've said this, and maybe it's an idiosyncrasy of mine. There was a great historian once. His name was Arnold Toynbee. Okay? And he once wrote this history of humanity. I guess he got through like 15 volumes and then he passed. And when he came to discuss Israel and Zionism, he said that the Zionists have created a new Jewish psychophysical type. The Israeli Jews, they're not Jews. I know that will come as kind of paradoxical.
No.
But they're not Jews.
I understand what you're
When
saying.
I was growing up, you know what a Jew was? A Jew was somebody who was smart, read a lot, was creative, culturally creative, and physically kind of feeble. There were a few Jewish sports heroes like Hank Greenberg. Again, the names will come back.
Adam Friedland.
No. A few, but in general, Jews were seen as being kind of scrawny, physically feeble. And so you think of a Jew, Franz Kafka, with the big ears, the high forehead. The classic one of my generation was, of course, Woody Allen. He was nerdy, very creative, he played an instrument, he acted, he was a writer, a comedian, a director. That was a Jew for us. The Israeli type is totally alien to what it was in my generation to be a Jew. So I don't even consider, if Israel called itself, believe me, if you want to solve the problem of anti-Semitism in the world, 95, not the full part, because Jews do exercise disproportionate power, wealth, and so forth, and that will always be a problem for Jews. But 95% of the problem would be eliminated if Israel just called itself the state of the Nazi people. It'll be over. Just drop the Jewish part. And a large part.
I don't disagree with you. That's why my criticism is entirely around the identity on Zionism, which is why I talk about the distinction, regardless of how people perceive it. There's very stubborn. There's a very stubborn retort towards that to say, no, Zionism means something different to me. And this attitude, I think, is carried by a lot of American Jews.
Well, I don't care very much what it means to you. You can.
No, I'm not saying it means to me.
Right, but
I'm
I mean,
saying,
they can say whatever it means
Yeah.
to them. I just want you to take a stand on one question. Do you believe that Jews as Jews should have superior rights to non-Jews in the state of Israel, for that matter, anywhere
Yeah.
else? And then you say Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. Fine. I don't really agree with that, but if that's what you believe, that's fine. For me, that's an ideological question. It's not a political question. You can believe whatever you want. But on the practical political question, do you think there should be a state which privileges one ethnic group over another? And that to me is the way Mamdani handled it, and I thought it was correct. It was very well done.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Let's see. So I wanted to talk to you and thank you. This has been 3 hours now that we've been talking. I know you brought up, I think you said you had a conversation with Candace Owens for
2 hours and 45 minutes.
Okay, well, we passed that point.
Candace Owens, I'll tell you one thing I was impressed by.
You were impressed by Candace Owens?
She has absolutely limitless energy.
Okay.
Do you know when we got off the interview, she was still after me about Freud and what a pervert he was and how a child molester.
So
I was very impressed by her reserves of sheer physical energy.
Yeah. So you sat down with Candace Owens, you discussed your books. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I don't know if you saw this, but she was waving around the copy of the Talmudic Jew. And she is very anti-Semitic. And what's actually kind of ironic about this, maybe you'll appreciate the irony here, is that Candace Owens, as well as Nick Fuentes, actually got a lot of their early notes, and Candace Owens' career is entirely concocted by David Horowitz and then later Ben Shapiro, two very conservative Jewish Americans. David Horowitz, former Trotskyist turned Islamophobe neocon, and Ben Shapiro is also obviously very pro-Israel. And what I've always found interesting is that Candace Owens was anti-Semitic before she got hired at the Daily Wire. And that wasn't a problem for Ben. But she only got fired from the Daily Wire because she was anti-Semitic and had become anti-Israel. This obviously feeds into the growing American anti-Semitic movement, one that goes from the, I guess, nascent anti-Semitism, stereotyping of Jews. I jokingly refer to it as, most Americans who don't live in these major cities where a lot of Jewish people live in have this attitude where it's like, yeah, Jews control the media, but I like Seinfeld. It's very funny. Or, Jews control the banking system, but they're very good with money, and I want my accountant to be a Jewish guy. So that's normally the attitude. But all of a sudden,
I know many Muslims who absolutely demand a Jewish lawyer.
Yeah. So, but what becomes a problem, that nascent attitude of stereotyping of Jews becomes a problem when all of a sudden that level of power is, from the eyes of the majority, that level of power is being used to silence dissent, to speak out against critics of Israel, and to purchase media properties, as the Ellisons are doing currently, to turn them into more pro-Trump and more pro-Israel outlets, which is laughable because they were already super pro-Israel. That is, I think, our point of agreement. But I wanted to hear what your perspective is on Candace Owens in particular, as someone who is, like, I think you and I both agree, very anti-Semitic, who's also mentioned in the dual anti-Semitism condemnation bill that I was on, where they put me and Candace Owens side by side to try to apply pressure to the platforms that have me on to claim that I'm anti-Semitic as well as her.
Well, first of all, you don't bite the hand. As a general rule, I have to be serious about this, and I suspect you'll be serious too. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. Candace Owens had me on her program twice. And just as a factual matter, I was, with one exception, for 10 minutes. I was never on even Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera blacklisted me. 3 years. I think it's acknowledged that I'm the world's leading academic authority on Gaza.
Yeah.
The entire network blacklisted me. And mainstream media in the U.S. asked me, was I on one network program? No. Television network program? No. Was I on any liberal podcast? No. It was just a handful, a very small handful. So I have to be careful just out of pure, propriety.
Yeah.
She had me on. She had me on twice. And she let me speak. There were moments where I significantly disagreed with her, and I was able to say what I wanted. Now, on the question of anti-Semitism, I'll be, fancy word, nuanced. And you can disagree with me or agree with me. I don't consider Candace Owens a political menace. She carries around prejudices about Jews. As I say, everybody carries around prejudices about everybody. Okay? The question is not whether a person carries prejudices. I'm sure, and I'm not saying this in any way disparagingly, I'm sure you do think Jews are cheap. That's just a prejudice that a stereotype people carry. Does it have any political consequence? In my opinion, no. It's a prejudice that people carry with them. I won't say for better or for worse, obviously, but only God knows how many prejudices I carry around with me in situations, as a professor, categorizing students on first meeting them. The question is not whether I characterize them on first meeting them. I do. It's a prejudice. The question is, do I give them a chance to prove themselves, or does the prejudice manifest itself in them getting a lesser grade? That's when a prejudice becomes a, so to speak, political problem.
The woke terminology is subconscious bias.
Yeah, I think everybody carries subconscious biases. The problem with the woke people is they have no idea how the human consciousness works, and they think you can interrupt racism as if you can pull an emergency cord in the subway, interrupt racism. It was just complete crap. But I don't want to be.
I think it's, you know what it is? I sometimes sound like a broken record. I haven't really spoken that much today, even though I speak for 8 hours a day normally. It is ultimately a capitalist manifestation. I think it's a very corporate way to approach humans, where you are supposed to present yourself as a brand. A brand is what? Sanitized. A brand is perfect. A brand can't be one way or another, right? It's supposed to be the most manicured version of yourself. And I think that the problem with our approach, even in academia, on a lot of these identity politics related issues, subconscious biases, implicit biases, is that we take away the humanity and the imperfections of humanity from the conversation and turn human beings into corporate vessels, almost brands. That's the problem.
The human mind is very complex. I mean, any 2-year-old, or I should say every 8-year-old, understands that. And when you're addressing an issue like racism, or what you call subconscious prejudices or whatever, it's the chances of being able to eliminate that in any foreseeable timeline are so remote. So maybe in some ideal society in 1,000 years from now, these prejudices will be eradicated. But for the moment, I just don't see that as a priority. The priority has to be trying to give people a fair chance in a system that's robbing them of their past, robbing them of their present, and giving them no hope whatsoever for the future. And so that's why I believe that Bernie Sanders and his progeny, they are correct in what they're focusing on.
Well, I guess I do that with Bernie.
Jobs.
In some respects, with his opinion on Israel, where I think that this is something that I've tried to describe.
Before we do that, I'm happy to engage, but for the moment, I have to get back to the Candace Owens question.
Okay, Candace Owens.
Because I want to clarify my opinion. I think that politically, she's pretty much innocuous. She's not seen as a political figure or aspiring to political office. She's kind of a figure, you might say, like Oprah. Oprah appealed to white women, as does apparently Candace Owens, obviously coming from different directions, but I would say politically pretty innocuous. I don't believe that with the case of Tucker Carlson. I think there's a potential political problem there.
I think it goes beyond immediately having an impact in politics or running for office. I think even with Candace Owens, there's definitely a significant component there because she commands the influence and attention of large swaths of the population. So I wasn't bringing up the Candace Owens thing to like try to lecture you or something, just so you understand. I just wanted to hear your perspective on your experience with Candace Owens. Because I think you should go on every platform. That's my policy.
The problem with Candace Owens is, you know the expression, you have to pick your battles.
Yeah.
There were many things that she said which I strongly disagreed with. And then you have to decide, unless I'm going to stop her at every point. When Cristobal paid Adam Smith, every 2 seconds, let's take a pause here. Let's take a pause here.
Yeah.
Because she disagreed with virtually every point he made. And she did it very effectively, I thought, extremely effectively. But at some point, it just doesn't work. Then it's like, why did you come on the show? If you're going to disagree with every single word this person says, then why did you even come on?
That's not, I wasn't even saying like you should go up there and disagree.
I was careful to, so to speak, pick my battles.
You did pick your battles when it came to defending the Bolsheviks. When she said that the Bolsheviks were exhibiting an anti-Christian bias.
Right. They killed 60 million Christians and then they pretended to be Holocaust survivors.
I like that was the line in the sand that you drew for Candace.
Because then people would say that Norman is unprincipled, that for his entire life, he has identified himself with a certain historic tradition, and now that tradition is being dragged through the mud, and he just sits there nodding. And I wasn't about to do that. I wasn't about to do that because that had to do with my personal integrity. That's the tradition I consider myself part of. Well, I didn't. I wasn't appalled. Look, yours is a different generation from mine. People think they have facts when they find it on the web. And if you spend too much time on the dark side of the web, you're going to find evidence for everything. And that's not the standard of evidence of my generation, that you found it somewhere on the dark side of the web. And she thought that she had evidence for all these sorts of things. And I just tried to be calm and rational and say, no, I don't believe there's evidence for these sorts of claims that you're making. Just as I don't believe that there's evidence that Israel killed John F. Kennedy. Just as I don't believe there's evidence that Israel killed Abraham Lincoln. And just as I don't believe that...
Is that even a theory?
It will be soon, that Israel was the cause of the fall of the Roman Empire. I just think these things are a real stretch. Now, you could say whatever you want. That's not, for me, the question. The question is, do I have to take seriously what you say? You're free to say it, but I'm not going to attach any significance to it. You know, Tucker Carlson, among others. As I said, I think 70% of what Tucker Carlson says is true. But when he starts going off and saying that Israel is trying to destroy the United States because it wants to make enter into a partnership with India, I just raise my eyebrows. Where did that come from? Or when he insinuates that Israel was involved in the Kennedy assassination. Well, no. Then I think you've gone off the rails.
Well, it's the scapegoating, right? I think this is a concept born out of American chauvinism, Western exceptionalism, American exceptionalism, where I think at the end of the day, if you truly, and I do think Tucker actually has seen the crimes of Israel and has found it to be heinous. I will say that. I think he is a shrewd operator, but I do believe that he genuinely finds it morally repugnant to a certain degree. But I think what he has done and what a lot of people do is, for example, they'll blame Israel for the Iraq War, right? And this is my distinction. I actually might even disagree with you on what you've said about the Iran War, where I do think that Israel has played a much heavier hand in the Iran War.
I do believe that.
Whereas the Iraq War is very clearly imperial extraction of natural resources.
I totally agree.
Whereas there is a divergence now.
I agree with you on both points.
So I think it's basically shifting the blame over to Israel or even to Jews as a representation of Israel to say we are blameless.
Totally agree.
We are perfectly. We would not be stained with these military quagmires if it wasn't for the Jewish state.
Yeah, I think that I've said I believe there's a problem there. I'm not going to say that Tucker Carlson is an anti-Semite. I'm not going to go there. I didn't say it with Candace Owens either. What I will say is I believe there is a problem there in what they're saying and this attempt now to blame Israel for everything. It's awful enough what's happened, but now I think it's gone kind of over the top. It's kind of, if I can use the expression, it's kind of a hate fest. And I've noticed that people are very critical of what I've said about Tucker Carlson because I'm kind of ruining the fun. The fun now is everybody thinks they're so brave and courageous attacking Israel. Well, actually, I think it's perfectly obvious. It takes exactly zero courage right now to attack Israel. I think it takes a certain amount of courage to defend it. It does.
It has shifted quite dramatically, yes, the pendulum has swung in the other direction.
And it's not that I'm in principle against hate fest. There are a lot of people who are deserving of the hate that's directed against them. But one has to, I think, always pause to be as analytically and factually rigorous as possible because we don't want to create, like you say, we don't want to create distractions and scapegoats. We have to be clear. And one of the things we should be clear about is the nature of our own society and not to pretend as if Israel hadn't come along, we would have been on a virginally white path.
Norman Finkelstein, thank you so much for coming on. This is a real honor. I have to do a podcast after this. Mm-hmm. This is my 7th hour. What is your parting words for people? Where can people find Gaza's Gravediggers?
It can be found on my publisher's website. It's orbooks, orbooks.com, one word. And I see it as the record of what happened. I'm trying now to combine Gaza and Inquest into its martyrdom with this, Gaza's Gravediggers, an inquiry into corruption in high places. And I want to make it a 2-volume set called The Black Books on Gaza, the truth about what happened. And I believe that if you know the truth, then you will have less difficulty answering the question, do you condemn what Hamas did on October 7th? I think you'll find that you're able to say, you know what, after what was done to those people, maybe what happened October 7th was wrong, but I'm not going to be on my high horse scolding them for what was done any more than I would lecture Nat Turner on why what he did in 1831 was wrong.
All right. Well, once again, thank you so much, Norm. This was a real incredible opportunity. I apologize. We were supposed to have this conversation a very long time ago, but I guess it turned out to be somewhat fortuitous, given the circumstances. Still, there are plenty of crises happening around the world. But once again, thank you so much for coming on. This was a real honor to have you on, and thank you for all of your work. All right, everybody, I am going to end the broadcast now because I have to go. And I will see you tomorrow from Michigan. I will be in Michigan tomorrow. I'm going out there for Abdul Al-Sayed. and
I'll
then
tell
going
you
to,
off camera, I had some friends communicate to him. This is off camera, right?
no, it's not. Not off camera. No, not
no,
yet.
no, no.
I'm doing the outro right now.
No,
So wait, hold on. Not yet.
Okay.
Okay. Oh no. Okay.